Today, we're kicking off part 1 of our series, What If Deku Had Wolverine's Powers? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is Dekuism King from Archive of Our Own. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. It happened on a hot summer day. The sun's heat was at its peak, bearing down on little Izuku's tiny shoulders as his knees trembled and he bit his lip. "Do I really have to be the villain again, Kaken?" Bakugo rubbed his nose. "What, you want me to be the villain? Don't go saying dumb things." Izuku frowned. He was always the villain when they played, but he didn't have it in him to argue today. Their games of hero and villain often devolved into just another game of tag because Izuku spent the whole time running. So finally, Bakugo stomped his foot down. "No more running. You're a villain, so you're supposed to come after me." It wasn't like Izuku wanted to act like a villain, but he also wanted his only friend to stop yelling at him, so he hesitantly got in a fighting stance as Bakugo grinned. "That's more like it. Don't expect me to hold back." He ran towards Izuku, raising his hand as if to prepare to blast him in the face. They'd played like this so many times before, and yet something about that day had Izuku's whole body rushing with adrenaline. Maybe it was the harsh sun bearing down on them from above, or maybe it was because he decided to stand his ground and act like the villain Bakugo wanted him to be. Bakugo's hand seemed to come down towards him in slow motion as Izuku let out a squeaky cry, squeezing his eyes shut and jabbing his fist forward. He was supposed to fail, like always. Bakugo was supposed to land the hit, like usual. Nothing was supposed to come out of Izuku trying to fight back. As Izuku threw his punch, a sharp pain shot through his entire arm and hand, his spine stiffening, making him cry out in pain. "Ah!" Bakugo's cry was even louder as he stumbled back, falling onto his butt and grabbing his cheek. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, gasping at the sight of BLD leaking down Bakugo's face and onto the ground. Time suddenly seemed to return to normal as the two boys stared at each other in shock. "What happened?" Izuku glanced down at his own hands, where 3 sharp blades were protruding out from his hand, in between each knuckle, dripping with Bakugo's BLD. Both he and Bakugo stared at the claws, backing away from each other. Tears dripped down Bakugo's face, mixing with the BLD on one of his cheeks as he shakily stood up. "What is wrong with you?" he breathed out. The sight of BLD made Izuku's head light, and then came the throbbing pain in his hand from where the claws had literally stabbed through his knuckles in order to appear. I'm sorry. He turned tail and fled, tears strkng down his face, waving his hand in the air as if he could shake the claws off of his fist. But they were sturdy and solid, and it hurt. He didn't even know where he was running, but he knew he didn't want anybody to see him with these monster claws covered in BLD. Finally, Izuku ducked into an alleyway and collapsed against a wall, tucking his knees to his chest and staring at his claws. Go away, please, it hurts, he sobbed, rocking back and forth, too scared to touch his knuckles that were now leaking his own BLD all the way down his wrist. He squeezed his eyes shut so he wouldn't have to see his own BLD. Go away. A wet sensation poked at his hand, making him gasp and scoot away from the sudden presence right beside him, a pale blonde girl roughly around his age. She giggled and grinned, revealing sharp teeth. "Hi, you're bleeding a lot. Can I see?" He sniffed and shook his head. "And no, you should get away. I'm dangerous." She kept her grin and scooted closer. He scooted away. She scooted closer. He scooted away. Finally, she grabbed his wrist to keep him in place before leaning in to inspect his hand. "Wow, it's really red. Red is my favorite color." My favorite color's green," he muttered. What a strange conversation to have in this situation. She giggled and leaned in some more, lick her lips. Ah, what are you doing? Izuku gasped as Toga licked the BLD off his wrist. He tried to pull away, but she clung onto his arm and began dragging her tongue up his hand to his knuckles, where her tongue came dangerously close to the claws just to lap up the BLD. She did this a few times before lick her lips. There. All clean, thank you for the meal. Izuku hadn't breathed for an entire minute, just staring at where the BLD on his hand had been replaced with saliva. Slowly, he found his voice. Why did you do that? That's not okay. You're not supposed to clean it like that. She suddenly leapt into his arms, hugging him so hard she squeezed the breath out of him. Yay, you're still here. Most people go running and screaming when I try to lick their BLD, but not you. Nope. Hee hee. Thank you, little boy. I couldn't run, even if I wanted to, he choked out, face going pale as she hugged him even tighter. He was definitely weirded out by her. It was just by chance that he happened to be too in shock and too weakened to run away. Finally, she stopped squeezing him and sat back with a wide smile, some of his BLD still smudged on her cheek. I'm Toga, Himiko Toga. For a moment or two, he just stared at her in disbelief, mouth open in a silent scream. He didn't want to be here, stuck in a dark alleyway with a weird girl who had just licked his hand. And yet, common courtesy made him clear his throat to speak. Midoriya, he muttered. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, why am I not surprised to see you here again? The school nurse sighed, propping up her glasses as he sat down opposite her. My mom is busy today and won't be able to take me for my checkup at the doctor, so she said I should just ask the school nurse to check my hands once school was done. The nurse sighed, but gestured for his hands, running her fingers across his knuckles. When she pressed down a few times and he showed no signs of pain, she nodded. Everything seems normal. Did your regular doctor say when the new ones are expected to grow in? Or when these ones are expected to fall out? Izuku shook his head. He wasn't even certain that it would even happen. But I'm supposed to get regular checkups, just in case. It really is like a baby teeth situation with my claws. She nodded, he thanked her for her time, and then he was on his way home, massaging his knuckles as he walked. He could feel them in there, the strong, sturdy steel claws that were sharp enough to cut through trees. They'd grown so much more obedient over the years, never lashing out on their own. Even when he was agitated, it was his own mental block that he had to deal with now, accepting the pain of letting the claws pierce through his skin every time he called upon them. Of course, his natural healing abilities made this easier. Another day of no changes. I should mark this in my notebook. He opened his notebook and flipped to his calendar before stumbling back as he ran straight into another person's chest. That person was, of course, none other than Katsuki Bakugo, hands in his pockets like he'd been standing there waiting for Izuku to round the corner and run into him. Hey, watch where you're going, you shitty nerd, Bakugo snapped, looking him up and down before grinning and suddenly snatching his notebook out of his hands. Ah, Kaken, wait. No can do. You know what I heard? Heard you want to get into UA. You, of all people. Don't make me laugh. Izuku gulped. Where did you even hear that? Well, it's my job to bring you back down to reality. Bakugo crushed his notebook in his hands before letting out an explosion, burning it, making Izuku gasp and ruffle his hands through his messy green hair. Kaken, no. Why did you It's already ruined, he cried out, falling to his knees to observe his notebook as Bakugo dropped the charred papers. You want your face to be next, nerd? I can throw explosion after explosion at you and you still wouldn't die, right? You'll just heal through all of the burns? Heh, isn't it crazy how you were just made to be the perfect punching bag, Deku? Izuku, already on the floor, backed away a bit as Bakugo advanced on him, flexing his hand and fingers to get them ready to let loose. Izuku shook his head. Please just stop, Kaken. Remember what happened when we were kids? Nothing good ever comes out of this. Bakugo's eyes widened, nostrils flaring as Izuku looked at the scar that had been permanently etched onto the side of Bakugo's face, 3 deep gashes that served as a permanent reminder of what Izuku had done to him as kids, and probably the main reason Bakugo continued to come after him. Don't try to be a smartass with me, Deku. Besides, we both know you'll never pull your claws out again. Not like that. Those claws of yours, they're only good for cutting SHT up. For cutting people up. You know it, too, don't you? Izuku bit his lower lip, glancing down at his knuckles as Bakugo stomped his foot with a chuckle. See? You can never be a hero, Deku. You're a villain. Born with a villain's quirk. Can't use those claws to do anything but kill. He bit his lip hard enough to draw BLD. Please don't. Bakugo laughed some more, kicking Izuku in the chest. Huh? Begging before I've even thrown a single explosion? That's faster than usual, Deku. Somehow you've gotten even more pathetic. Please, just listen to me, okay? Don't do it, Izuku continued, wiping at his wet eyes and getting up on his knees. Don't lay a finger on him. You'll only get in trouble. Just leave him alone, okay? Bakugo squinted one of his eyes, pausing in confusion. Huh? The FCK are you talking about? Slowly, he turned around, but he only managed to turn halfway before he stopped with a box cutter pressed against his throat, nearly ready to carve his Adam's apple out. The FCK, he couldn't even gulp without risking puncturing his own throat from the simple movement as Toga's eyes stared straight up into his. The aura looming off of her could only be described as murderous intent. There was BLD lust in her eyes, but none of the glee that usually came with it. Izuku. Her voice was completely serious, dripping with venom and hatred. I'll make him bleed. No, don't, Izuku scurried to his feet, waving his hands around in front of him anxiously. It'll make things worse for you, so just lower the blade, oh okay? Both Toga and Bakugo were tense, staring at Izuku and then glancing at each other. Finally, slowly, Toga backed away and pocketed her box cutter. Are you sure about this? Izuku nodded with a sigh of relief. Yeah, he's not worth it, okay? The FCK did you just say about me? Bakugo screeched in rage. Hearing Izuku say such degrading things sent him into a blind fury, and sparks began flying in his palm as he whirled around and swung his arm at Toga to blast her directly in the face. There was a loud clapping sound, no boom, no stab, just the sound of skin on skin. Bakugo's eyes widened, slowly glancing at the hand that had grabbed his wrist, stopping him from throwing an explosion at Toga. He tried to tear his hand away, tried to swing it forward again, but that hand firmly held onto his wrist, keeping Bakugo from getting violent. Don't. Izuku spoke with a completely calm and serious voice, eyes narrowing, his other hand clenched into a fist. Don't lay a finger on her. Toga already had her box cutter back out, so between the threat of the crazy girl ready to do a murder and the humiliation of having Izuku of all people catch his wrist, Bakugo just cursed and ran off with a red face. Couldn't even get in the last word like usual. They watched him go before Toga flipped her box cutter in her hand. Can I go after him? He shook his head. No, and you can't just go threatening people with knives, either. That'll get you into big trouble, and I don't want to see you get in trouble. We're just lucky that Kakin has too much pride and ego to tell anyone that he got threatened and ran away scared. Toga pouted, but put her box cutter away and began walking with her arms behind her back. That's not fair. You always tell me that bleeding is no big deal. So why is it a big deal now that I want to make that big bully bleed? Come on, he'll be more tolerable when he's red. I told you it isn't a big deal as long as the other person agrees to it. This isn't the same thing. He sighed and walked with her. Come on, I'll walk you home. Toga blew a raspberry in the air, but eventually they matched each other's pace side by side. If I could have it my way, I'd just spend all day with you, Izuku. But my parents already said we're going to dinner this evening. Boring, unless... Her eyes suddenly sparkled, and she practically jumped on Izuku with a dreamy grin. I wonder if they'll serve the steak to me, then I can poke it with my fork and watch the BLD all leak out onto the plate like it does when the meat is really juicy and raw. Izuku rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, there's no way they're serving something like that, even if you asked for it. His answer made her pout even more. Couldn't ask for it even if I wanted to. Ugh, do you have any idea what it's like to be me? I have to wear a mask all day at that stupid girls-only school, and even with my parents, She sighed and suddenly bumped her cheek against Izuku's shoulder. You're the only one I don't have to wear a mask around, Izuku. That's why I only want to hang out with you, and why I get to lick your BLD all the time. He blushed from how close her face was to his, but she usually responded very well to physical comfort, so he reached over to pat her head. Well, I'm always here for you if you need to vent. It's not fair that you have to hide the fact that you need BLD for your quirk. It's like, what if I had to hide the fact that I need to eat lots of meat and protein for my steel skeleton? It's not something people should get upset about. He reasoned, smiling lightly when she snuggled her cheek into his shoulder more. How about I let you watch me practice with my quirk this weekend? Would that cheer you up? She immediately brightened up, jumping for joy. Really? Yay! Izuku using his quirk means lots of BLD for me. Not as much as it used to. My knuckles heal pretty much instantly, so they barely bleed now. Toga pouted, unable to even be happy for his progress because of how thirsty she was for his BLD. He didn't hold it against her. Eventually, she cleared her throat. Izuku, are you really gonna go to UA and become a hero? That's always been my dream, he answered, staring up at the clear sky as they walked home. Toga's pout turned into a complete frown, but she still clung onto Izuku's arm. I don't get what's so great about heroes, she muttered. When I was a kid, my mom broke her ankle once. Fell down while telling me not to go running off or something. Apparently, I wouldn't stop touching and poking her broken ankle when the heroes arrived. Got scolded real bad for it. Got told I was a bad daughter for touching my mom's injury. They even said I looked like a villain, smiling at her broken ankle. Toga seemed to shrink into herself a bit more, eyes narrowing. Heroes are supposed to stop people from ever getting hurt, so I don't think guys like that would ever accept me. They look at me and see a creepy villain. Izuku let her words sink in, pursing his lips together before speaking up without even looking at her. But Toga, when I become a hero, I'll still accept you. She suddenly stopped walking, breath hitching in her throat. He couldn't tell if she wanted him to smile down at her or if she didn't want to be looked at right now, so he just kept his gaze up at the sky while Toga threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Maybe he should have been watching her more closely, though, because suddenly there was a sharp sting on his neck, making him wince and glance down as Toga licked up the BLD from her bite. Hey, did you really just use this opportunity to get some of my BLD? She giggled and licked her lips. I couldn't help it. My heart just feels so full after what you said to me, and when I get all happy like that, I can't stop myself from wanting some BLD. He sighed before smiling and leaning his head to the side. Well, okay, if you're just doing this because you're happy, then you can have a little more. They stood on the side of the road awkwardly as Toga clung onto him and SCK his neck. She had to keep her teeth pierced into him because his skin kept healing, which basically just meant a constant tooth stabbed into Izuku's neck. He could tolerate that part, though. The part that made him finally gently push Toga off of him was when another couple passed by, cheering and calling him such a brave young man. Obviously, they couldn't see that Toga was drinking his BLD, so they must have thought he was letting her give him a hickey in public, which was just way too embarrassing. Oh, okay, that's enough. Toga, come on, let's get you home before your parents complain. They took a few steps before he stumbled a bit, but Toga caught him. Izuku, did I take too much BLD? He shook his head. I'll be fine in a minute or two. My body has a solution for any type of physical impairment, it seems, including BLD loss. Think of it this way, he's sorta similar to an axolotl. An axie what? Izuku asked, looking up at his mom. The doctor brought up Izuku's X-ray. See this? Your skeleton is quite literally made out of steel, every bone in your body. But then the real kicker is your tissue and cells. Those have regenerative properties that are quite similar to the axolotl's ability to regenerate complete limbs even if they're ripped off. In other words, your boy is half steel, half axolotl. Inko sighed in frustration. I already expected all of that. That's not part of his quirk, right? That's just the body type he inherited from his father. The steel skeleton, the regenerative cells in his tissue. His father had all of those things in his natural body. The new part is the steel suddenly shooting out of his knuckles. Those things hurt my poor boy yesterday. The doctor scratched the back of his head. Well, yes, you're technically correct. The steel skeleton and healing cells are just a natural part of his body and not necessarily his quirk. But it's still pretty neat, huh? He supplied. But Inko didn't seem humored, so he sighed. Yes, young Izuku's quirk is his ability to control the steel bones in his knuckles to shoot out into makeshift claws. By nature, these claws are actually the steel bones hiding beneath his skin, meaning they have to tear through his skin every time he wants them to manifest. So yes, his quirk is always going to hurt him to some degree. On the bright side, the regenerative tissue he inherited from his father balances out this issue somewhat. Those last words were lost on Inko's ears as she hugged Izuku and cried. So my poor baby boy is always going to have to hurt himself if he wants to use his quirk when all he wants is to be a hero, which would require him to use it a lot. Izuku looked up at his mom, raising an eyebrow in confusion before smiling and holding her face in his tiny hands, making her stop crying to look into his sparkling eyes. Why are you crying, Mom? You heard the doctor. My quirk hurts to use, but I can heal it all better, too. So I'm super happy with my quirk. He jumped out of his chair, fists clenched determinedly. And that means I can still be the bestest hero in the world, just like All Might. Thank you so much for looking after Himiko. Really, I don't know what we would do without you. She just doesn't seem to get along with the girls as much as she does with you. Toga's mom bowed her head in gratitude as Izuku blushed. It's really no problem, ma'am. We'll text later when you're done with dinner, okay, Toga? Toga winked at him and licked her lips before her mom ushered her away, muttering about how they'd need a whole hour to dress Toga up to look appropriate for their dinner this evening. As soon as Izuku was walking alone again, he found his feet taking him further and further away from his house. His mom wouldn't be home until later anyways, so he might as well take a stroll and just do some thinking. Naturally, that brought his brain back to Bakugo's words from earlier. The words Bakugo had been saying to Izuku their entire life ever since Izuku first used his quirk. You can never be a hero, Deku. You're a villain. Born with a villain's quirk. Can't use those claws to do anything but kill. He walked beneath a dark tunnel, manifesting his claws. There was a flash of pain as always as they punctured through his skin, but his skin almost immediately healed before any BLD could even pour down his hand. A villain's quirk, huh? He lightly dragged his claws across the wall of the tunnel, frowning at the scratch marks they left behind. He barely put any force into it, and they'd still left marks behind. Was it true? Was his quirk really useless for saving people? It's fine now. Do you know why? Because I am here. Those same words played on repeat over and over, echoing in the silent room, the silent house for at least half an hour before Inko checked on her son in his bedroom. Izuku, are you still awake? She slowly walked into the dark bedroom, where she found her 5-year-old son in front of his computer, pointing at the screen. As usual, a video of All Might saving people was playing. Mom, I want to be a hero, more than anything. His eyes were heavy with tears that finally fell down his cheeks when he made eye contact with his mom. I want to save people, but then Kaken said I'm just like the bad guy from the new All Might video, and I Inko watched the video, covering her mouth as All Might faced off against a villain who turned his fingers into blades. It wasn't the exact same as Izuku, but the visual resemblance was striking. Striking enough to send the poor bullied boy into a sobbing mess. "Oh, Izuku," Inko rushed forward to hold him. "The whole class started calling me a villain when Kakin showed them the video. Even I couldn't say they were wrong. Mommy, why am I like the bad guy in the video? I don't want to be the bad guy. I want to be the hero." He slowly looked down at his fists as his mom hugged him. Is it my quirk? Do I have a villain quirk?" "No," Inko gasped and held Izuku's hands in hers. "No, Izuku, don't say something like that. Your quirk doesn't make you good or bad. It's all about your heart." Despite his mom's comforting words, once he began to cry. He couldn't stop. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut and let out a loud and painful cry. In response to his turmoil, a slicing pain engulfed his hands, making him cry out even louder as his claws shot out of his knuckles. "Ah!" Inko screamed, jumping back just in time before her hands were cut. Everything went silent. Time seemed to slow down just like when he'd hurt Bakugo. Mother and son made eye contact. Inko saw the look of horror on her son's face. Izuku saw the look of fear turning into regret on his mom's face. "I am here! I am here!" All Might's voice was the only sound in the background as this moment that would permanently scar Izuku sunk into both of them. "Mom, are you Scar?" "No," she immediately embraced him again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I could never be scared of you. I promise. Oh, Izuku, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." If he shut his eyes for long enough, he could still see that look on his mother's face. It wasn't like he blamed her or held a grudge against her for that night. No, she was right to have been scared of him. He stared at the scratch marks he'd left on the tunnel wall long and hard. A villain's quirk. He didn't know what exactly that meant, but if somebody told him to imagine a villain's quirk, something like his own quirk would undoubtedly be one of the first ideas to pop into his head. He dragged his claws against the tunnel wall a little harder, wincing at the screeching sound, like nails on a chalkboard. "I wonder if I'll ever be seen as a hero," he muttered, staring at his claws. "Or if I'll only ever be seen as these." He began shifting the angle of his claws in front of his face, trying to see if he could force a way to show his reflection in the steel for a dramatic moment. He was having a crisis, but he was still a bit of a nerd and liked to recreate dramatic scenes straight out of a movie like this. He didn't notice anything was wrong until the foul smell was already clogging his nose, making him GG and double over. Not running immediately was his mistake, and the second he whipped around, he'd already lost his chance. It wasn't water was thinner, and it didn't stick to the skin like this. Slime? Some sort of sludge? That would explain the foul smell that was now surrounding him, engulfing him in the form of some sort of sludge monster. Leave it to Izuku to spend his final moments on this earth analyzing the exact material of what was suffocating him. GRRRK, it wasn't just suffocating him, it was pouring into his mouth, sticking to his skin hard enough to try and seep in through his pores, creeping up his nostrils. He tried to scream, and thankfully he was smart enough to squeeze his eyes shut so nothing would get in there right away. "This'll do nicely, for now. Anyways, all I can." A voice spoke directly into his ear, and yet somehow it sounded all too distant at the same time. A villain. It must have been a villain. Somehow, that realization sent the fighting instinct surging through him once again as he flexed his claws and began slashing around in the sludge. This villain wasn't made out of water, but it sure felt like it with how his claws seemed to just pass through liquid, unable to make any actual dents. He sliced and stabbed and whirled his arms in circles, but he couldn't cut his way out. Need air. The disgusting, thick slime was in his throat, plugging his nostrils, and the fight slowly left his body as did the last of his breath. A blast of wind crashed into him, but by then he was already falling unconscious. It was a short blackout, though, and he came to only a minute later, still coughing and sputtering and rolling around on the floor onto his hands and knees. "Ah, SHT, what happened?" He rubbed his eyes and smacked his own chest to make sure there was no sludge stuck in his orifices before he looked up. He was still beneath that dark tunnel, and yet the sight before him was nearly enough to blind him. There he was, All Might, his hero, in the flesh, grinning at Izuku and stuffing a bottle of struggling slime in his pocket. "You all right, kiddo?" Izuku was speechless for a moment, jaw hanging wide open before he began scurrying around the floor. My notebook, need an autograph." When he found his notebook, he flipped it open only for his eyes to burst out of their sockets when he saw All Might's name already signed across an entire page. He already signed it. All Might saluted him, laughing in that hearty and booming voice of his. "Well, you seem full of energy, so I'll trust that you're okay. I've got to get this guy to the authorities." He tapped the bottle. Wait. Izuku shot to his feet and began waving his arms around. "I've always wanted to meet you and talk to you, and now that you're here I have so much I want to say. First off, you're my greatest inspiration and, I should start by thanking you for everything you do. You're just so incredible. But also I have my own problems that I wanted your advice on. And also personal questions that I've always needed to ask you, like first off, why have you never had a girlfriend before? And second off, what was it like training in America? And third off..." "Kid, slow down," All Might shouted in exasperation. "Look, I'm sorry, but I must be off. Everything is fine here now, so goodbye." He gave a loud and mighty shout of parting before jumping out of that tunnel and launching himself into the air. Finally, he could relax from all the questioning, only for him to glance down and notice Izuku was still there, clinging onto his leg. "Kid, what are you doing? Let go." "If I let go I might land on somebody." All Might winced. "That's true, prepare for a landing." He held onto Izuku before landing atop a tall building. Izuku stumbled backwards on top of the building, putting some distance between him and All Might as he shook his head and body to get rid of the shivers from traveling at such a high speed. "You're crazy, kid," All Might scolded, before he began coughing and clutched his sides, smoke starting to drift off of his body. "SHT, not now." Izuku stared down at the floor, not noticing All Might's current state. "I'm sorry, but I just really needed to get your advice. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so I won't waste your time this time. You see, the truth is..." Izuku flexed the bone in his hand, and his claws sliced out of his knuckles. "All my life, people have called my quirk scary and villainous. Even my mom used to be scared that my quirk would hurt her. I know she didn't mean it, but she can't help the way she feels, you know? It's just, my quirk can be dangerous, and it can scare people. And that's not what a hero is supposed to do." He frowned. "So, I really needed to ask you, do you think I can still be a proper hero, even with a scary and villainous quirk? Please, I just want to know if I can be like you, All Might." He shouted his heart out, slamming one hand right against his chest and stomping forward, finally looking up. "Who are you?" In front of Izuku was not All Might, but instead a skinny old man who was currently coughing up blood. "This is the worst timing my body has ever had." The skinny man sighed before looking up at Izuku. "Make no mistake, boy. Now that you've seen me like this, there's no reason to hide it. I am All Might, the true form of the symbol of peace." Izuku began sputtering and spiraling, waving his arms around to try and talk himself through a logical explanation of what was happening. Finally, All Might lifted his shirt. "See this here? This is a wound I endured during the most vicious fight I have ever encountered, with the most vicious villain out there. Ever since that fight 5 years ago, my ability to be a hero was greatly limited. I can only maintain my muscular form for a few hours per day until I need to revert to what you see before you now." Izuku's knees felt weak. The wind atop that building top felt like it could sweep him up as he stared at the injury on All Might's stomach. He couldn't even begin to imagine what could cause such a horrible-looking sight. The skin and internal injury looked so bad it made him doubt for the first time if even his body would have been able to heal it. Young man, being a hero is hard work indeed. You will endure many injuries, and enduring the public's opinion can also be tough for those like you. I have plenty of friends who land on the heroes who look like a villain list every year. All Might began walking towards the door that would lead down from the building's roof, but he was still answering Izuku's question, so Izuku didn't stop him. Even so, as long as you believe what you're doing is right, I'm certain you can find a way to become a hero even with a scary quirk. Izuku's eyes widened, tears dotting his eyes as he let out a deep sigh of relief, clutching his chest and sniffing and smiling at his hero. Thank you. My quirk may be scary, but I've always believed that being a hero was the right path for me. So, if you really think that that's what matters most, then, well, I always figured I could always default to being a meat shield or something. He laughed nervously. You see, aside from my quirk, I was also born with a steel skeleton that can take a lot of hits, and on top of that I have super regenerative cells in my body that can grow back my bones and even my limbs if I get hit really badly. I mean, I've never had to actually go through something that crazy before, but I've been told that I can do it since an axolotl can do it. He rambled as usual, but All Might had suddenly paused with his hand on the door handle, so he figured All Might was losing his patience. Sorry, I guess what I'm trying to say is... Fool. All Might suddenly turned to look at him again, this time fixing Izuku with a hard stare. A meat shield, volunteering yourself to get hurt in order to be a hero. Young man, you only say such things because you don't know true pain. All Might gritted his teeth and clutched his stomach injury. Putting yourself in danger, destroying your body, these things are scary and painful. And accepting these as a part of your daily life wouldn't be heroism, it would be naivete. The sudden harshness made Izuku shrink back, lowering his head. I'm sorry. All Might sighed. If you wish to become a hero, young man, then that is a fine dream. But if you wish to do so by making yourself a meat shield because you're worried your claws are too scary, then young man, you must accept that choosing to put yourself in harm's way is even scarier. Please remember that before you find yourself in over your head, unable to do what you've promised to yourself. Being a meat shield is not the same thing as being a hero. Izuku bit his lower lip so hard it would have drawn blood if not for his body immediately healing his lip. The sound of the roof door shutting was the only indication he got that he was alone on the roof now as he fell to his knees. He stayed on the roof for a few moments before finally heading down and walking through the sidewalks of downtown. He opened his notebook to stare at All Might's autograph. It wasn't like he wanted to become a hero for admiration. Protecting people was the most important part, and that was why he continued to train his claws even though he didn't want to rely on them. The claws would forever be his image if he did use them, though the image of a hero with a villain's quirk. And that wasn't what he wanted. Is it really so wrong to want to be a shield instead of a sword? He ruffled his own hair in frustration. He didn't want to disregard the words of his greatest hero, but the idea that his whole worldview and plan was somehow not a viable mindset for a hero just made him want to flop on the floor like a fish and sob his heart out. His pity party was interrupted by a massive explosion down the block, making him jump and look up at the smoke-filled sky with wide eyes. There was no doubt about it, this was a villain attack. Izuku rushed to the scene of the crime, where a huge crowd of people were already gathered. Maybe on any other day he would have pushed himself to the front of the crowd, insisting that he needed to see the entire thing to help him prepare to be a hero. Now, he just hung in the back of the crowd, too dejected to make a move. "I hear it's got a kid," some people in front of him said. "No way, really? Then why aren't the heroes saving him already?" "The kid is making quite the ruckus with his quirk, and the villain is tough, too. Some sort of weird slime monster, None of the heroes here are well equipped to deal with it. Izuku froze, his steel spine stiffening. Slime monster, but that was impossible. All Might had already caught that villain after it had almost killed Izuku. But then Izuku came along and distracted All Might. When All Might was about to leave him there in the tunnel, he panicked and threw himself at All Might's leg. That must have been when he knocked the bottles of slime down and allowed the villain to escape. Somehow, all he could do was look down at his shoes and give a small, pitiful laugh. So that was it. Not only did he have a villain's quirk, but now he'd even helped a villain to escape. Maybe Kaken is right, he muttered, squeezing his eyes shut, tears threatening to spill over. At the thought of Bakugo, he swore he heard that same signature shout of his, piercing through the air. The sound of panic made Izuku's eyes snap wide open again, looking up. Somehow, the crowd split apart just enough for Izuku to see the scene: a kid and a slime monster struggling against one another, constant explosions turning the surrounding area into a fire hazard. And in the very middle of the slime monster, squirming and thrashing about, was none other than Bakugo Katsuki, the boy who made it his life mission to constantly remind Izuku that he was born with a villain's quirk. Suddenly, the claws in Izuku's knuckles began to creep out. He smacked a hand over his mouth, and he let out an inaudible gasp when Bakugo looked up and made eye contact with him. There, he saw something he never thought he'd see, a silent plea in Bakugo's eyes. "Please, help." Izuku's notebook hit the ground, already several feet behind him as he dashed through the crowd. "Kid!" Civilians and heroes alike shouted at him as he ran past all of the bystanders. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," he wanted to shout. He was certain that was the fastest he'd ever run in his life, and yet time seemed to slow down, like he could hear every single individual step he took, his ears ringing. And with each step, the same question followed him: why? Why was he doing this? "You were just made to be the perfect punching bag, Deku," Bakugo's voice echoed. "You can never be a hero. You're a villain, born with a villain's quirk." "They look at me and see a creepy villain," Toga sniffled. All Might glared at him. "Being a meat shield is not the same thing as being a hero." "Ah!" Inko screamed and jumped away from his claws. "I could never be scared of you. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Kaken, Izuku's claws sliced out of his knuckles, and he jabbed them into the sludge, scooping bits of it away from Bakugo's body until Bakugo's head and torso fell forward, coughing for air. "Deku, the hell are you doing here?" That was the big question, wasn't it? Why was he here? What was he doing? As Izuku desperately sliced his claws through the slime, the voices and scenes that echoed in his mind replayed over and over again. He knew his claws were scary and only good for hurting. He knew ignoring his claws to become a meat shield was naive and not heroic. He knew there was nothing he could really do even if he rushed into here. But with tears streaming down his face, Izuku let a wide, toothy smile spread across his face as he let out a heavy sob. "You just looked like you were asking for help." Bakugo was at a loss for words, but when the slime began struggling against him again, he also tossed another explosion. Think, Izuku desperately sliced through the slime before he found the slime's eye. I'm sorry," he called out before slicing his claws straight for the eyes. SHT, the villain's entire slime body convulsed backwards, and Bakugo collapsed onto the floor, coughing and sputtering for air. "Kaken, run!" Izuku shouted. As Bakugo struggled to get up, Izuku gritted his teeth and ran forward, shoving Bakugo out of the way just as the slime villain recovered and threw himself at his target again. "Ag!" Izuku gasped as he was engulfed in the slime instead, while Bakugo rolled to safety a few feet away, looking up in shock as Izuku took his place. "This is probably for the best, huh? You're much more troublesome than that guy, whose explosions go through me like fire through water." The slime villain hissed as Izuku's entire body sunk into the green goo. He sliced with his claws all around him, But it seemed earlier he'd exploited the villain's one weakness by getting his eyes. Now, his claws sliced helplessly through the viscous liquid as Izuku began losing his air just like earlier in the tunnel. At least Kaken is safe, he thought to himself, letting his eyes fall shut. I can endure pain. Better than anyone else. At least this way. Young man, a familiar, loud voice disturbed his thoughts, and Izuku's eyes widened, peering through the green slime to see the only large silhouette that he would recognize even through the sludge he was trapped in. Everything will be fine now. Do you know why? GRKKKK, Izuku choked for air through the sludge, drowning out the last of All Might's catchphrase, making All Might wind up his fist for a punch. Young man, if I punch with my full power, you will be caught up in the blast and gravely injured. Will you regenerate? Thanks to Izuku explaining his powers to All Might already, all he had to do was give a thumbs up. He was still struggling inside of the slime, which was keeping the villain from fleeing as he just screeched in horror. No sight was more terrifying to a villain than All Might preparing an attack. All Might's eyes narrowed. And, even if you heal, are you prepared to handle the pain that comes with it? Izuku met All Might's gaze, his own eyes steely and resolved. He made a punching motion with his fist into his own palm, and All Might nodded. Detroit smash. Izuku spread his arms to his sides to accept the incoming damage. There was a blast of air before his world went black. When he awoke to rain. The clouds overhead had gathered into a spiral, and rain was pouring down on him. Just on him. Of course, All Might's punch had changed the weather overhead. Iconic All Might move. He would fanboy over witnessing it if he had the energy. Ugh, he tried to move, but his body seemed glued to the ground. One glance to his left explained it. His shoulder had been completely bisected off of his body, and there were shattered bones and muscles all the way down his entire left side, revealing his steel bones in pieces. There was a puddle of BLD leaking out of him that told him his injury had probably been much worse, and he must have been unconscious for a while his body healed. Still, he was laying there on the same floor where he'd rushed in to bravely and foolishly face the slime villain for his bully's sake. What an idiot! Young man. Only when he heard All Might's voice did he notice the muscular figure crouching down on his right side with a grimace. That looks quite painful. It is painful, Izuku admitted, flinching when part of his jaw didn't quite move correctly when he tried to speak. He spoke anyway, high pain tolerance or whatever. I can feel my body stitching itself back together, remaking my steel bones and cracking them back into place, muscles stretching to realign. It hurts so bad I want to cry. He sighed hoarsely as the rain began dying down. But I'm thankful. If this is what needed to happen to stop that villain, to save Kaken, then it's worth it. All Might pursed his lips together. Young man, I apologize. Izuku could only manage a raised eyebrow. I told you getting hurt was scary, and that accepting pain was no way to be a hero. But in truth, I was projecting myself onto you. The truth is, I'm the one who's been afraid of pain. Ever since sustaining the injury that limits my ability to be a hero, I've operated with more caution than ever, avoiding any fight or situation that would push me beyond my physical limits. I was nearly ready to abandon this crime scene and leave it to others because I knew going into this form again would invite great pain onto my body. But when I saw you, young man, and how fearless you were, risking pain and death to do what matters most to save a life, well, it made me remember that getting hurt in order to protect others is the essence of being a hero. Izuku choked on what he assumed was some sort of bone in his neck or jaw realigning itself. Why, you don't think I was just being naive? I didn't even think before I ran in? All Might suddenly grinned. He grinned wide. Exactly. I have known many great heroes in my day, and all of the greatest ones had one thing in common, their origin. That origin being their bodies moving on their own to save those in need. So then, being a meat shield is a valid way to be a hero. Don't push your luck, All Might scolded. That's still an awful way to look at heroism. However, the core belief system behind it, being prepared to face pain in order to protect others, yes, you may be naive, young man, but there is no doubt in my mind now that you have the heart of a true hero. Izuku's eyes widened more and more as All Might spoke, before growing heavy with tears that spilled down the sides of his face. I don't know what to, he gasped for breath through his sobbing, managing to lift his right arm to rest on top of his crying eyes. Thank you. All Might's wide grin softened as he lightly punched Izuku's good shoulder. I must leave, authorities are arriving and I can't hold this form for much longer. Meet me at the Takoba Municipal Beach tomorrow morning. There is something else that I would like to discuss with you. Then, as if he'd never been there, All Might was gone. Authorities and police officers replaced him, scolding Izuku and calling in immediate medical attention, even as Izuku insisted he'd heal up on his own eventually. They scolded him for being reckless. They scolded him for doing nothing but causing himself to cry tears of pain. What they didn't know was that the tears that flowed from Izuku's eyes was the result of years and years of baggage turning into relief, with All Might's words engraved into his head. There is no doubt in my mind now that you have the heart of a true hero. After the medics gave him the okay to leave with just a cast around his recovering shoulder, it was mostly back in place by now. Izuku was good enough to make the walk home on his own. Of course, it wasn't long before he was confronted by Bakugo, who babbled some nonsense about not owing him any favors before he dashed off. Izuku didn't really get it. Either way, he found a smile on his face as he walked back home, remembering All Might's words as well as All Might's request to meet with him at the beach tomorrow. He was definitely looking forward to what else All Might had to say to him. Izuku, Toga was waiting at the front gate to his house as he walked up, and he had no time to prepare as she ran over and jumped into his arms. "Wo. Hey, go easy on me. My arm's in a cast here," he insisted, but he hugged her nonetheless. Toga immediately buried her face into his chest, sobbing and hiccuping uncontrollably. It was the first time he'd ever seen her like this, making his eyes soften as he patted her head. "Hey, come on, it's okay." She shook her head furiously while sobbing. "And no, I saw everything on TV, I saw it all." "Yeah, but I'm okay, I promise. Here, look, feel my cast." He guided her hand to his cast, where his arm and shoulder felt sturdy. "See? And I'm good enough to walk, so there's no need to cry." She began sobbing even louder when she heard those words, smacking her fist against his chest. "No, you don't get it. I saw you. You were..." She threw her head back to flat out scream to the heavens. "You were completely covered in BLD. It's not fair. It's too cruel. It's horrible. Your body was completely torn up and I wasn't there to drink any of it." Izuku began sweating. Oh, that's why you're crying." She was just pouting now, stomping her foot on the ground and even stomping on his foot. "Just imagining the feast I could have had, especially compared to the lame steak my parents made me eat," she cried some more. But Izuku couldn't take it entirely seriously anymore as he laughed and patted her head again. "Tell you what, how about you sleep over tonight? You can drink all the BLD you want throughout the night, like usual." And like usual, his regenerative body would compensate for the BLD loss. Toga crossed her arms, but clung to Izuku's side nonetheless, specifically the side with a cast, as if she was hoping to break his arm more. "Fine." As soon as they were inside, Izuku dealt with another crying woman via his mom. That one was actually draining and left him ready to knock out as soon as he and Toga headed up to his room after getting permission from Inko for Toga to sleep over, of course. She always let the two of them room together despite being a boy and a girl, which was sort of strange. She probably just viewed Izuku as being way too innocent for anything to happen. Before he could collapse on the bed that was calling his name, though, Toga lightly kicked his ankle. "Hey, shirtless." He blushed from his chin to his ears. "Huh?" She pouted. If you're gonna let me bite you for BLD all night, then you've gotta be shirtless. It'll be easier for me that way. He had technically suggested this, but somehow he hadn't considered just exactly what it would entail. Still, he wasn't the type to go back on a promise, so he swallowed the embarrassment and took his shirt off before laying in bed with Toga. Yay! Toga finally showed the first signs of glee ever since missing out on the feast that had been Izuku's body after taking a Detroit smash. She snuggled up close to him from behind, almost like she was acting as the big spoon, not that they were spooning at all, and bit down on his shoulder. Izuku winced. Hey, I know I have a high pain tolerance, but you bit down way too hard right away. Toga giggled and licked up the trails of BLD she'd caused his shoulder. He was already healing the bite wound away, so she bit down again just as hard. Can you blame me? After watching you get all BLDY on TV, I'm extra thirsty. I just can't hold back my thirst for you, Izuku. He blushed and sighed, letting his eyes fall shut and just dealing with the pain of her bites. All right. I did promise you could do this. Good night, Toga. She licked his shoulder some more. Good night, Izuku. Would she actually sleep any time soon? He figured she'd probably be up for at least an hour or two just munching away at his healing shoulder. Maybe he should say something. Before he could speak, though, Toga suddenly just pressed her forehead against his shoulder blades instead of biting. Izuku? He cracked one eye open. What is it? There was more silence. Finally, Toga wrapped her arms around his torso and pulled herself close to his back, trembling ever so slightly. Thank you for coming back safe and alive. I was. He could hear the shaking in her voice, bringing a smile to his face as he suddenly turned around so they were sleeping face to face, patting her cheek. Yeah, I know. She didn't seem to want to make eye contact, so he respected the privacy of her tears of concern and shut his eyes again, sighing in contentment to fall asleep while Toga snuggled closer to his chest, letting her get as close as she wanted to feel safe and secure with Izuku. The next morning, Izuku rushed to Takoba Municipal Beach, treading carefully since you never knew what sort of garbage was hiding in the sand. He and his mom used to come here a lot when he was a kid, but nowadays you were likely to find more car tires and dead animals washed up ashore than seashells. In the middle of a particularly large pile of trash was the man, the myth, the legend himself, All Might. The sight of him standing there, practically glistening in the morning sun like a unicorn, was all the reassurance Izuku needed to know that yesterday hadn't been a hallucination. All Might, he ran over with a hop in his step, waving his arm. I'm sorry if I'm late. My friend slept over last night, so I had to drop her off back home. All Might raised an eyebrow before grinning. Her? Sleepover? Congratulations, young Midoriya. Huh? It's not like that, Izuku insisted, waving his arms around as All Might gave his signature mighty laugh. Sorry, that's just old person teasing, he cleared his throat. Now then, let us get into the meat of the topic. He flexed both arms. My quirk is named One for All, and it is a quirk that is unlike any other. It is passed down not through hereditary genes, but from one predecessor to the next, constantly enhancing this power and allowing it to grow from generation to generation. That is the truth behind the hero All Might. All Might spoke dramatically. Izuku's eyes widened, and his jaw hung wide open. Come again? It took a lot of repeating for the concept to finally sink in, but once it did, and once Izuku stopped muttering and fanboying to himself about learning such an awesome secret about his favorite hero, All Might finally cleared his throat. I am telling you this, young man, because I believe you are worthy to be my next successor. After witnessing your actions yesterday, I know that you have the heart and ideals of a true hero. And also, inheriting this quirk will require one who can endure great pain. So, will you? It would be an honor, such an honor, Izuku managed to gasp through his disbelief. All Might flashed him a grin, and as the sun seemed to shine down on them like it was putting a spotlight on their story, Izuku's eyes sparkled as he watched All Might reach up. There was nothing in the world that could spoil this moment. All Might held out a thin, yellow hair. "Eat this." Izuku's smile turned into a screech of horror. Since Izuku's steel skeleton and regenerative body meant he could already withstand any damage he took, All Might figured he could transfer the power to Izuku right away and work on building his experience with how the quirk feels while also continuing to build his body and muscle to better hold and utilize it. Izuku's brain already blocked out the hair ingesting, so now all that was left was the excitement that wouldn't stop bouncing around inside of him as All Might led him to a pile of trash. "Our goal is to get you ready for the UA entrance exam in a few months, so there isn't any time to waste. I understand that you already have a quirk of your own that's worthy enough to be a hero, but now that you have two quirks, you must learn to utilize them both in conjunction. Naturally, that means your ability to use one for all needs much more training, given that you just received the quirk." Izuku nodded and looked down at his fist. "I see. If that's the case, Detroit Smash." "What are you doing?" All Might fretted as Izuku's arm glowed green, veins bulging out of his arm, highlighted in red. He stepped forward and threw a punch at the garbage pile in front of him. With a large explosion of sand and air, the garbage basically evaporated from the powerful punch. "Ah!" Izuku stumbled backwards as the arm he'd used for the punch burst apart in its own explosion of BLD. And just as the garbage pile had evaporated, so too did his arm. "Why, young man?" All Might pulled at his own hairline at the sight of Izuku missing an entire arm. His shoulder wasn't even a stub, it was more grotesque than that, with the remaining skin that had once made his arm still hanging droopily off of his side. That was crazy," Izuku exclaimed, gritting his teeth. You could see some of the steel bone in his shoulder, but to his credit, his body did seem to be working overtime to repair his arm. "You cannot be blowing your own arm off just because you'll heal it back. Recklessness is not the same thing as determination." Izuku held up his other arm. "I'll just lower the power output this time, Smash." He punched at the air with a similar glow, gritting his teeth as his arm went purplish black, his steel bones twisting up inside from the recoil. "Arizona Smash." All Might called out a move Izuku had never even heard before, karate chopping him right on the head. "When I tell you to stop, you stop, honestly." Izuku grimaced, but clenched the broken fist despite the pain. "The fastest way to get my training started is to figure out exactly where my limits are and use that as a reference for my starting point. Only once I have my starting point can I start to go up. For that sake, I have no problem using my body as a test subject since I can regenerate the repercussions." All Might grumbled. "I see now what a troublesome student you are going to be, for as reckless as you are also efficient. It makes it difficult to scold you properly." He smiled at All Might and held a thumbs up. The simple movement already didn't hurt anymore. "It's okay. My arm will grow back before I have to go back to my mom for dinner, and that's all that really matters. So, I have the workout regimen you gave me for everyday exercise, but what are we still doing at this beach?" Izuku asked, walking through the piles of garbage with All Might the following day. All Might grinned. "Ha ha ha, young man, this is part of your workout regimen. Look around heavy objects as far as the eye can see. Your task is to clean up this entire side of the beach by the time the UA entrance exam comes around. Get some community service done while training." Izuku's eyes sparkled. "Wow, that's so heroic, as expected of All Might." "Ha ha ha, now get to work." "Yes, sir." Izuku started with the smaller, more manageable objects, lifting them away from the water and dumping them in a pile off to the side of the beach. He would create a large pile of garbage that could easily be accessed by the garbage trucks. "This one will be tough." He crouched down to observe what appeared to be part of a broken dresser. It was heavy and awkwardly stuck beneath some larger garbage, so he let the power of one for all course through his arm at a moderate power to tear it free and toss it into his pile. TCH, he gritted his teeth and glanced down at his purple arm. Broken even from that amount of power, huh? Young man, All Might sat atop a pile of garbage, which couldn't have smelled very good. You can use one for all to help you lift things, but rely on too much of its power and you'll have to pause for a minute or two to let your arms and hands recover in between each object. Is that an efficient pace to work at? No, sir. All Might nodded, still with his signature grin. Learn to pace your usage of the quirk better. That is your first lesson. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed with determination. That night, Izuku stayed at his desk well past midnight, muttering to himself and tapping his eraser on his desk while his pencil scribbled notes down into his notebook. 5 minutes to recover a broken arm, a 10 if I go really overboard and make my bones twist up. All Might says the steel in me can handle the backlash better than he expected, so by next week I can increase the power for the same amount of recovery time, he said to himself, drawing diagrams of his different power levels and the different consequences on his body and recovery time. As I am now, if I had to take on a villain, the best way would be, he let his eyes fall shut to imagine a hypothetical villain attack. There he was, facing off against the slime villain again. How could he solve this using one for all in his current state in a way that wouldn't get him scolded by All Might? He couldn't just blow his own arm off of his shoulder again, but the air force of a few lower-powered punches could keep the slime away from him. Sacrifice a few broken bones in one arm to splatter the slime across the floor like All Might had done. As soon as the slime was separated, he'd be able to locate the same weak point he used against the slime to save Cack in the eye. Just like last time, he'd go up to the eye and... He recoiled back a bit as his claws punctured through his knuckles at the memory of using them against the slime villain. With a sigh, he stared at his claws and abandoned the hypothetical scenario to draw more diagrams. Young Midoriya, I hope you don't make a habit out of being late. All Might scolded him as Izuku panted for air. Sorry, my friend caught me while I was on my morning run and then dragged me around shopping with her all morning. All Might raised an eyebrow. Once you start to show more progress, then you can start to enjoy yourself again. Don't go getting distracted just yet. We're still very early in the training process. I know, it's just, you said our training was supposed to be secret. I didn't want her following me here and discovering I'm training with All Might of all people. Young man, it can't be too difficult to come up with an excuse to get away from a friend for a day. She'll stalk me wherever I go, Izuku blurted out, blushing a bit when All Might froze. I just mean, she likes to watch me a lot, oftentimes without announcing her presence, especially if I try to blow her off. So I had to make sure she was satisfied with our time together before running here. All Might rubbed the back of his head. I see. I apologize. It seems your life is much more complicated than I thought. They continued cleaning up the beach, with Izuku taking his shirt off to get in the water and digging up the weirdest items out of the sand. A lot of it was just using his own growing strength, picking up car tires out of the water and walking them to his pile. Just a minor strength boost, and hiya! He tapped into one for all's power for just a quick boost to throw the car tire to the top of his pile, dusting his hands off together. Very good, young man. Grazing the power as if just taking one small lick from a popsicle. We'll call that 1%. Very useful for where you're starting out. Izuku nodded. All right. If that's 1%, then, he clenched his fists, grazing the power as All Might worded it, and then letting more of it fuel his muscles. One for all, 5%, he declared, flexing his arms before slamming his palms into a refrigerator to move it. He could do this much without breaking his body at all, but still, who leaves a refrigerator in the middle of the beach? Phew, Izuku wiped some sweat off of his forehead, munching on a dango skewer that All Might had bought for him when they got some food after training. As fun as training was, he was obviously over the moon at getting to hang out with his idol, getting stuff to eat together. About time you showed up." He glanced up at the sound of his own voice. There he was, another Izuku Midoriya, standing outside the front gate of his house, bouncing a dead bird from hand to hand. Needless to say, it made his stomach twist seeing an image of himself doing something like that. "Did you need something from me, Toga?" he asked, casually walking over. "I tried texting and calling, but you wouldn't answer." She pouted, but once he was close enough, she latched onto his arm. "I missed you, so I decided to walk around in your skin for a bit. Hey, now that you're here, why don't we watch that horror movie where the girls get covered in BLD? You know I love girls, and I know you want to see that scene from the trailers where they get naked." Izuku blushed and leaned away a bit. "Why, you mean that one that's out in theaters right now? Sorry, maybe some other time. There's a lot of studying I still need to do for the UA entrance exam." After all, the written test was still a thing, and he spent so much of his time nowadays focusing on the physical training that he couldn't keep neglecting studying for the written exam. Toga let go of his arm as he sighed and walked up to his front door. "Wash the BLD off of your hands before you go home, okay? I don't want your parents yelling at you again." As he headed inside, Toga's arms just fell by her sides, watching him leave. "Oh, okay." A few months had passed now, and Izuku had gotten the hang of fluctuating between different percentages of his power. "Very good, young Midoriya. In your current state, control is the most important factor to keep in mind." He nodded and powered up his fist. One for all, 5%, he stepped up to a garbage pile and punched it, splitting it apart into a more manageable size. Your steel bones not only add extra resistance to the backlash, but they also pack an extra punch with every hit. Very nice. We should begin training to implement one for all's power with your own quirk soon. Izuku's eyes widened before staring down at his knuckles, lips pursed together. "Yeah, maybe." All Might raised an eyebrow. "Hey, Deku, where do you think you're going?" Bakugo and his goons blocked the classroom doorway right as Izuku was about to step out. "I'm in charge of cleaning up the classroom today. Could you move?" Bakugo gave a cackle that was probably his attempt at mimicking All Might. Izuku wasn't really sure nowadays. Ever since meeting All Might and spending so much time with him, it couldn't be any clearer to Izuku how unlike All Might Bakugo was despite looking up to him just like Izuku. "What are you gonna do, nerd? Pull out your claws on me? Prove what a villain you are?" He shoved Izuku's chest, but Izuku didn't move. "You know my steel skeleton is too sturdy to be pushed around, Kaken. Come on, be reasonable about this." Bakugo's eye twitched as he cranked his hand back. "If you want to brag, then you can brag about being a meat shield." Instead of showing any fear, Izuku just sighed and shoved past Bakugo's shoulder. "I've got things to do, and I just want to clean the classroom, okay?" "Huh?" Bakugo glared at Izuku as he ignored him to walk away. Never able to take the humiliation of not getting the last laugh in, Bakugo launched an explosion at the back of his head with a growl. "Take that! Don't underestimate me, nerd!" Even after that, Izuku didn't even turn around to acknowledge him. All Might sat down next to Izuku overlooking the beach. "Tell me, young man, why is it that you hate your own quirk?" Izuku's eyes widened as he looked up at All Might. What? That's not." All Might just shifted his eyebrows, so Izuku sighed and deflated. "It's not that I hate it. It's just that, my whole life, I've been told that it makes me look like a villain. That my claws are only good for hurting people. I think it really started when I saw that video of you years ago taking down a villain who could also make blades out of his hands." All Might frowned. "Young Midoriya, that man was a villain because he wanted to hurt people. No quirk is inherently good or evil, it's about how you use it." Izuku sighed. He already knew all of this, but having a logical understanding of something didn't mean he would suddenly feel better about it. Seeing that he wasn't getting through to him, All Might nudged him and pointed at a large pile of garbage. "Look there." Imagine if there was an innocent civilian who got buried beneath that pile of garbage. How are you going to get them out in the most efficient way possible that doesn't leave you vulnerable in case a villain also comes and attacks? Izuku grabbed his own chin. Solving hypothetical rescue and villain scenarios was one of his favorite things to do, even before meeting All Might. If they're stuck beneath the garbage pile, then obviously I'll have to free them first. It's not too large of a pile, so moving things around shouldn't hurt them too badly. I can probably start by just disassembling the garbage pile. Doing so as quickly and efficiently as possible would require one for all at a percentage you can't handle, All Might grinned. At the very least, you'd be breaking an arm to do it. If a villain showed up, losing that arm, even if just for 5 minutes, would be disastrous. You'd much rather use your claws to cut away at the garbage pile, wouldn't you? It's the safest and most efficient way to free that civilian. His eyes widened a bit as he stared down at his knuckles, his claws unsheathing. All Might wore one of his large, signature smiles. Your claws can be used to save people, too, young man. Slowly, Izuku stood up and walked over to the garbage pile. He glanced back and forth between the pile and his claws, imagining a civilian buried beneath the pile and begging for help. One for all enhanced his arm at 5%, combining with his claws as he shouted and gave a mighty slash that cleaved the top half of the pile off. The other hand got rid of the rest. He couldn't help the tears that dotted his eyes as he turned and smiled at All Might, who smiled right back at him with a nod of approval. Izuku knocked on the door for the 4th time, tapping his foot nervously. Toga wasn't mad at him for not hanging out much recently, was she? Dealing with his quirk training and an upset friend at the same time sounded like the type of drama that would stress him out too much. Instead of Toga, though, it was her parents that answered the door. "Oh, Midoriya, have you brought Himiko home?" He frowned. "She isn't with me." The parents glanced at each other. "She left quite early this morning. We assumed she'd be with you. We did try calling her to make sure, but she hasn't picked up. I have to wear a mask all day at that stupid girls-only school. You're the only one I don't have to wear a mask around, Izuku. That's why I only want to hang out with you." Toga's words echoed in his head. She wouldn't be hanging out with anyone else, would she? Was she just out all by herself? "I'll call her and let you know if I find out where she is. I'm sorry." He bowed his head to Toga's parents before he ran, calling her over and over even when she didn't pick up. For some reason, his heartbeat was starting to skyrocket. Then, all of a sudden, there she was, skipping down the sidewalk towards her house. He took a few deep breaths, pocketing his phone and standing still since she was walking in his direction anyways. "Where were you? Your parents were worried." She tilted her head. "Do I need to always tell people where I'm going?" Izuku shook his head. "No, I was just worried about you, too, is all. I guess because we haven't seen each other in a while. I'm sorry." Toga was walking closer now. "MHM, it's been a long, long time since I got to drink your BLD, Izuku." The closer she got, the more clearly Izuku could see some BLD smeared on her cheek, not her own BLD, clearly. "What were you doing?" She shrugged. "I don't have to tell you everything. A girl is allowed to have some secrets in her life, isn't she?" He grimaced. I'm sorry that I've been too busy to see you lately. I'm just worried about you. That's why I want you to answer." Toga paused, eyes narrowing towards him for quite possibly the first time ever as he stared at the BLD stain on her cheek. "Are you suspicious of me, Izuku?" He swallowed thickly, the tension between them palpable. It's not like that." She stared into his eyes, but he couldn't meet her stare, so she bit her lower lip and walked past him without another word. Just as she passed him by, Izuku whirled around and grabbed her wrist. "Wait." Toga whipped around to look at him with something akin to rage and betrayal in her eyes, but it quickly faded when Izuku leaned in and began wiping his shirt sleeve against her cheek with a gentle touch. Be careful, okay? He whispered, a hint of hurt in his voice from the growing distance between them as he cleaned the smudged BLD stain off of her cheek so no one else would notice. He tightened his grip on her wrist. I just don't want you to get into any trouble. She was stunned into silence, just staring into his kind eyes as their faces stayed just a few inches apart, hovering there, before finally Izuku pulled back and slowly walked away. Toga walked along the beach with her arms behind her back, staring down at the sand. For as long as she'd known Izuku, he would drop everything to spend as much time as possible with her. This was the first time in their whole lives where it really sunk in that they were on separate paths. Toga was busy being aimless, and Izuku was busy being a hero. Heroism. That was the thing taking Izuku away from her. She knew that was what made him happy, but just thinking about it made her wrinkle her nose. Be careful. The memory of Izuku wiping the BLD off of her cheek suddenly made her pause, her heart catching in her throat. Suddenly, she had the urge to drink lots and lots of Izuku's BLD. It had been so long since she last drank his BLD. Rah! A sudden shout filled the air. The voice was familiar, and yet so strange to her at the same time. And then it shouted again, even louder. Toga hurried through the beach, briefly glancing around in shock at how clean the area was. It definitely wasn't the same dirty beach she remembered, letting her easily track down the source of the shout. Finally, she found it. She found him. There stood Izuku Midoriya, standing tall atop a giant pile of trash neatly organized together. He was shirtless and completely ripped. Toga had never noticed how much muscle he had. It was like he had grown biceps and abs out of nowhere, flexing them as he stomped his foot, arms hanging at his sides, threw his head back, and gave a mighty roar to the heavens. Toga's heart stopped in her chest, her mouth going dry at the sight of him screaming his soul out, the sound echoing in her ears, in her mind, in her heart, and elsewhere. She'd never seen Izuku look like this before. When did he get muscles like that? He was sweating like crazy. The tears in his eyes weren't his normal tears. His claws were proudly out. For the first time, as she looked at Izuku and felt a familiar throbbing in her heart, she wasn't overcome with the desire to drink his BLD. She was overcome with something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Something that made her body go hot and her face turn red. Until somehow, the only response she could muster was to turn tail and flee the clean beach. But for the rest of her life, that scene of Izuku roaring into the sky would be etched into her mind. The day was finally here. U.S. entrance exam, the physical portion, at least. The written exam had already taken place. And while Izuku was still nervous and waiting for those results, he'd been pretty confident all throughout the test. The studying had definitely paid off. He just wished he hadn't had to lose so much potential bonding time with Toga to study over the course of the last few months. She'd seen him off at the train station with a smile, though, so at least she didn't hate him. She wouldn't accompany him any further, though. For some reason, she seemed to not want to get close to Yua. She'd also been acting strange lately in general, but he was also different as of late. They were both growing up and growing apart, but he didn't want to think about that part. Now wasn't the time to worry about the fear of change. Anyways, now was the time to embrace change because today he began his first step on his journey to become the #1 hero. Finally, I am here, he shouted All Might's catchphrase as he arrived at Yua's front gate, eyes wide and sparkling, not taking his eyes off of the school of his dreams for a second as he walked. Naturally, that led to him tripping. Eek, he cried out, his face going directly towards the dirt, but the impact never came. Instead, he was just suspended right above the ground. Are you okay? A brown-haired girl with a round face gently grabbed him and helped him stand upright, smiling and pressing her fingertips together. He suddenly felt like his own weight dropped back into his body from nowhere, blushing when she leaned in, causing him to lean back and stiffen. Why, yeah, I'm okay. Thanks for helping me, I think. She blushed lightly. And no problem. I'm your Araka Ochako. I just used my quirk to make you weightless so you could float, that's all. It was nothing, really, haha. His eyes widened. So that's your quirk, that's so cool. And she's so cute. She rubbed the back of her head, laughing nervously at all the attention. Well, good luck in there, she waved and went on ahead into UA, and he was quick to follow. Once he was inside the UA auditorium, he sat next to Bakugo since they were sectioned off into the same school area. Bakugo, of course, didn't say a word to him, but that was fine with Izuku since he was too busy fanboying over the present mic on the stage announcing the rules of the exam. Oh my gosh, he really is just as loud in person as they say. Present Mike snapped his fingers, letting the stage project a large screen that showed some robots. During the practical exam, all candidates will be dropped off in a replica of an urban setting to conduct a mock battle. You've got 10 minutes total to use your quirks and your wicked wits to immobilize these robo-villains and score points. Different robots have different score points according to how difficult they are, so more isn't always going to be better in here. The more points you earn, the higher your chance of being accepted into UA. Oh, and candidates aren't allowed to fight each other. Doing so will be an immediate disqualification. We aren't trying to deal with a repeat of a few years ago when someone forgot to specify that rule. Haha, totally not me. Alright, kiddos, it's time to get rolling. You know what we always say here at UA, right? Izuku jumped out of his seat with an excited shout as the rest of the crowd also shouted alongside Mike. Plus Ultra. They were all moved to their exam spots, sectioned off into different groups. Izuku was separated from Bakugo to avoid the possibility of candidates from the same school cooperating. Not that Bakugo would ever cooperate with him. He was actually glad they were separated, because now there was no risk of Bakugo breaking the no fighting between candidates rule and potentially disqualifying both of them. Let the mock battle begin, Present Mike shouted over the intercom. What? No countdown? Izuku exclaimed, looking up at the intercom in shock, then looking around as the rest of the candidates all started rushing into the modern setting, with modern buildings and everything. The robot villains came out of nowhere, and the mock battle was officially on. He only had time to be surprised for a few seconds before the destruction all around him had him narrowing his eyes in focus and rushing into the modern setting. Some students nearby were hitting the robots with punches that must have been enhanced by their quirk somehow, and he even saw Uraraka making one of the robots float before making it crash into the ground. As soon as one of the robots came rushing towards him, he got in a stance and took a deep breath. No time for hesitation. Hiya-a! His claws slid out of his knuckles and he sliced through the robot, adding in 5% of one for all just at the point of impact to make sure it went down. When he saw the robot pieces in shambles at his feet, he grinned with pride. It felt nice to feel proud of using his claws. Whoa, hey, man, that was totally awesome. Looks like we're both slashing types, huh? A nearby red-headed dude complimented him, and the friendly competition made Izuku beam. Yeah, it looks like your body hardens your skin, right? That's super cool. Another robot rounded the corner, but as soon as he and the red-headed boy turned to it, a blue laser shot in between them and destroyed the robot. Non, getting distracted is how you fall behind. A flamboyant blonde boy winked and bowed. Keep that up, and I reckon I won't be seeing you boys in UA. Au revoir. Izuku scratched the back of his head, but the boy was right either way. He couldn't let himself get distracted, not even by Uraraka nearby, using her quirk on rubble, this time to flatten a robot, like an adorable badass. He went running deeper into the city, slashing at any robots he could find. It was his first fight, and it was exhilarating using his quirk like this. His adrenaline was pumping so hard that he didn't realize how much time was passing until Present Mike came back on the intercom. All right, boys and girls, here comes the big one. You can think of this thing as a natural disaster, because it's a real menace. Really, who knows what that principal was thinking anyway? It's worth 0 points, so good luck. As soon as the huge zero-pointer was revealed, stomping through the city streets and crushing the buildings beneath its wheels, all of the contestants began running in the opposite direction. Only Izuku stood his ground for a moment, looking around at all the kids running away. Wait, this thing was put into the test just for us to run away from it. That wouldn't make sense from the examiners, right? A boy with glasses zoomed past a bunch of the others, but he momentarily paused to scrunch his face at Izuku. You can stay and get crushed by that natural disaster if you'd prefer that. He gulped and surveyed his options before turning around to follow the crowd and run. Help, I can't move. The sudden shout made Izuku freeze and slowly turn around. As soon as he saw Uraraka on the floor with half of her body stuck beneath a pile of rubble, including her arm which rendered her unable to use her quirk, he ran straight towards her in the direction of the coming giant robot. It's you, she murmured. Hold on, he shouted, manifesting his claws in both hands. Uraraka stared at the villainous claws, but instead of showing any fear of his claws, she smiled. Thank you. He cut the rubble off of her before helping her stand. Can you run or walk? She winced when she tried to apply weight on her ankle by herself. And no. The entire ground began rumbling as the zero-pointer got closer and closer, making them both turn to watch it with wide eyes. Why, you should just leave. It'll be on us soon. Izuku gritted his teeth. I can't just. Save yourself, she insisted, clinging onto him with tears dotting her eyes. He stared at her for a bit, letting the sight of her despair sink in, before he gently helped her sit on the floor, fists clenched at his sides as he turned to stare at the coming robot. I won't abandon someone who needs me, so don't worry. He turned to offer her a smile. I am here. Her eyes widened, looking him up and down before staring at his claws. See, can you hurt it with those? He shook his head before turning back to the robot, eyes narrowing. All Might told me to pace myself, to not act recklessly. However, there are times where a hero can't sit idly by for the sake of his own protection. And this is one of those times. The power of One for All rushed through his entire body as he ran towards the giant robot, its shadow engulfing him. He'd felt this power countless times by now. He'd been training with it for months, and even though he rarely ever used it at full percentage, it was all too easy to let the complete power take over, emptying the entire load. Green electricity danced down his entire left leg before launching him into the air. The steel bone inside of his leg twisted, and his leg broke, which made him smile. That was 100%. When he first tried using the full power, 100% had literally evaporated his limb, making it explode in on itself and burst off of his body. Now that he'd built his body up in conjunction with his steel skeleton and healing, 100% only broke his limbs. I'm stronger now, strong enough to use this power. With furrowed eyebrows and a clenched fist, he channeled the power through his arm, then directly into his claws with a loud battle cry. The green electricity sparked from claw to claw, making them shine gallantly. 100%. He pulled his arm back. Then, right as he came upon the robot, brought his claws forward in an arc. Detroit slash. The impact of his claws sliced through the entire mechanical body, immediately making it begin to fall apart into pieces. Then came the impact from the sheer strength of the blow, flattening the robot before it exploded. As he began descending back to the ground, Izuku let the pride well up inside of him. The ground was getting ever closer, and he let his eyes fall shut. The wind roared in his ears, his body pumping with adrenaline. He cracked one eye open to see Uraraka, safe and sound. Good. That was all that mattered. And that was the last thing he saw before his body went splat on the ground. When he woke up, he was in the infirmary, and of course his body had put itself back together. Apparently it had taken a few hours, and he got a thorough scolding from Recovery Girl, the school nurse. He couldn't even worry about any of that, though the scoreboards were revealed, and he hurried to see the results. When he saw the results, Izuku grinned and started to tear up at the sight of his name at the top of the list. Izuku Midoriya, 20 villain points and 60 rescue points, for a total of 80. Even above Bakugo, who had just 77 villain points and nothing else. He couldn't help but feel extra triumphant at beating Bakugo and saving Uraraka all in one day. It was too much for his heart to take. Naturally, Bakugo avoided him, but he was too ecstatic to feel upset about it, as he went sobbing into his mom's arms once he got home. She was even more excited than he was, clinging onto him and jumping around with him in her arms. "You did it! I always knew you could do it," she cried, hugging him and squeezing his hands in her own. It made him tear up as he momentarily looked down at their hands, remembering the time she'd pulled away from his claws. Izuku had never blamed her for just instinctively protecting her own hands, but that look of momentary fear of her own son had never left his mind. Now, feeling her arms around him, feeling her love, and seeing her squeezing his hands without a single hint of that fear, it made him cry even harder, relaxing his hands into her palms and burying his face in her shoulder. He knew his mom never actually feared him. He knew she'd held his hands plenty of times before this, but something about it happening now, at this moment, caused a weight to lift off of his shoulders as he ended his sobbing with a deep sigh of relief. "Thank you so much, Mom, for everything. But right now, I actually have to meet with someone else, too. I'll be back when dinner is done, okay? I won't be out that long," he promised, rushing out of the house as Inko wiped her tears and waved him off with a proud smile. Izuku jolted straight for the beach, where he saw the exact person he knew would be waiting there, All Might, waiting in his skinny form by the water. All my. Hhhhh, not so loud. The beach has been getting more popular ever since you cleaned it up, even now when it's dark. Izuku cringed and looked around. Sorry. Once it seemed no one had heard them. They both smiled at each other, and All Might stepped forward to rest a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Congratulations, young man. I watched the entire thing. You were incredible in there, if not reckless, but that's a trait of yours that I've come to accept. Honestly, I wasn't even surprised when you destroyed your own body to protect that girl. I fully intend on training such self-destructive tendencies out of you, but I can tell that scolding you about it now wouldn't accomplish anything. Izuku didn't think he had any extra tears after crying with his mom all evening, but somehow he still found his eyes wet as he beamed at his hero. Thank you so much. I didn't even know rescue points were a thing, so I was surprised when I saw myself at the top of the list despite not defeating the most robots. All Might grinned. Rescue points are a hidden grading scale that isn't publicly told beforehand. It encourages participants to act with true selfless intentions, rather than encouraging participants to act heroically solely for points. He nodded, already figuring that was the case. Izuku, who is this old guy? Huh? He nearly jumped out of his own skin as Toga popped up behind him, clinging onto the hem of his shirt. All Might cleared his throat and hid his face, backing away. I'm just a passerby. Don't mind me, I'll be going. Then, beneath his breath, he whispered to Izuku, Go on, be a man. Izuku blushed. It's not like that, he insisted, but All Might was already hurrying away as Toga tugged his shirt some more, making him sigh before turning to her with a slight blush. So, what are you doing here at this beach? I've been following you ever since you got home. Oh, that makes sense, he laughed off the stocking. Just Toga being Toga. You did it, she muttered, all of a sudden growing quiet. Quieter than he'd ever heard her before. You're really going to Yua? His eyes widened a bit before he steadied himself and nodded. Yeah, I am. When she wouldn't meet his eyes, he tried to lean in. Hey, are you okay? I mean, what have you been up to? We haven't caught up in a while. She shook her head. I don't know. All I know is, seeing you chase after your dream recently, it's made me think that I don't really know what I want to do with myself. That's okay. It's okay. He stepped forward to place his hands on her shoulders, eyes softening. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. We're only just leaving middle school, after all. Toga glanced down to his hands on her shoulders. We won't be seeing each other very much anymore, will we? I mean, even less than before. He bit his lower lip. I'll still call you, and text you and visit when I'm not busy, okay? For a moment, her eyes seemed uncertain, and he thought she might say, no, don't even bother. The thought that they could drift that far apart in such a short amount of time made his heart stop. But then, slowly, she returned his soft smile, and she leaned in to hug him. Okay? He smiled and squeezed her tightly before slowly letting her slip out of his arms. This is the story of how I became the greatest hero. But on my way there, I would make many mistakes. The beach air was chilly that night despite it being spring, and he hugged himself and stood still to just watch Toga's back as she disappeared into the night. I only wish that at that moment, on that night, I would have tried harder, done something more to make sure Toga was okay. Maybe if I had, she could have avoided what the future had in store for her. The first day of school at UA had Izuku's nerves bouncing around in his stomach. As soon as he entered the classroom, he was ready to finally begin his path to become a hero. Shut the hell up! Of course it was just his luck that Bakugo was in the same class as him. 1A. At least Bakugo wasn't yelling at him this time. He was yelling at one of their other classmates. The one with glasses, who had run past Izuku when the 0-pointer arrived. That wasn't shocking, though Bakugo would yell at anyone. The shocking part was, they were yelling back at Bakugo. Have you never heard of using an inside voice? Or showing respect in a proper classroom setting like this? This isn't your run-of-the-mill academy. This is UA High School. You need to keep your feet off of the desks. Yeah? You gonna make me, Four Eyes? Seeing someone actually stand up to Bakugo like this was truly unbelievable. But what was even more unbelievable was the way a bunch of his other classmates suddenly ran up to him, surrounding him with smiles and gasps. Hey, it's you. You're the one that zeroed that 0-pointer. Man, you were so awesome. That amount of power at this age is insane. Your claws look super cool. Can I touch them? How did it feel when you died? Did you go to heaven? Because your body looked like a puddle of goo when you landed. His whole face went red as he held up his hands and tried to back away. Thanks. Why you all really think I'm cool? Uraraka suddenly walked in behind him, tapping her fingers together nervously. I'm, so glad to see we're in the same class. Thank you for what you did for me. Even though I'll probably never forget the sight of you going, Splat? One of the other classmates supplied, making Uraraka GG and nod. His face had already been fully red, so he wasn't sure what happened to it when Uraraka walked in as he rubbed the back of his head. Sorry about that, but also, you're welcome. I'm all better now, as you see, so it's okay. She observed his body, which only made him blush even harder. Why, yeah, looks like you really did fully regenerate. That's pretty amazing. Amazing? You think I'm amazing? His heart was PND so hard as she leaned in a bit closer to praise him some more. Surviving a fall from hundreds of feet in the air was easy for him. Surviving a few minutes of praise from a cute girl seemed impossible. The time for idle chit-chat went by fast, and Izuku was directed to his seat right behind Bakugo. Bakugo obviously wasn't happy at that and refused to even acknowledge his existence, so he sighed and tried his luck with a purple-haired boy seated behind him. Hi, I'm Midoriya Izuku. The boy had slight bags beneath his eyes, and he barely even looked at Izuku before staring past him, brows furrowed. It was the biggest, don't even talk to me vibes Izuku had ever gotten from somebody. With a frown, he turned away to just focus on the class. Their first day was apparently a Quirk evaluation day instead of an orientation, with the Eraserhead as their teacher. Izuku couldn't be more stoked if he tried. Even with Aizawa constantly casting the class intimidating glares, He was just so cool. Izuku had been a fan of his for forever, so he really wanted to impress him during this Quirk apprehension test. Most of the tests were physical exams of some sort, pitting the students against each other to compete and see who could run the fastest or jump the farthest, or who could grip a handheld device with the most force. Naturally, one for all was great for all of these. Obviously, Izuku knew the power of All Might's Quirk, but comparing himself to his classmates really made him realize the power he was carrying in his body. He knew how powerful the power at 100% was, so seeing himself keep up with the rest of his class, using only 5% of one for all heavily lifted his spirit and ego. He didn't bother using any of it for the sit-ups test, though he topped the charts in that test with just his own raw muscles. The ball throwing test was last, and a lot of the students were putting out impressive scores, especially Uraraka. She made that ball float to infinity and beyond. And then there was Bakugo, throwing the ball with a large blast and smirking when Aizawa complimented his impressive score. As he walked past Izuku, though, the two briefly stopped and made eye contact. "All right, Midoriya. Show me what you can do, though. Judging by how I've seen you use your quirk so far, I imagine a physical strength test like this will be right up your alley." Izuku nodded at him calmly, but on the inside, he was freaking out. That was a compliment, right? Aizawa was saying he was strong. He couldn't believe he'd just gotten complimented by the Eraserhead. He wanted to jump for joy and maybe ask for an autograph if he found the courage, but that could wait until after he threw the ball. This time, however, he wanted to show off a bit. It was the adrenaline rush of doing so good on all the tests so far. He wanted to end it with a bang. So, he channeled the power of one for all into just his fingertip, at full power, 100%. Unsurprisingly, the ball went flying, surpassing even Bakugo's score, while his blackened, broken fingertip quickly began to heal. He couldn't help but grin and glance at Aizawa, who nodded at him before moving on to test the next student. As Izuku walked over to where the rest of the students were resting after finishing the final test, Bakugo walked up to him and began letting sparks fly out of his palm. "All right, it's time for you to talk. What the hell is going on here?" Izuku froze and glanced around before raising his hands. "What do you mean?" "Arg!" Bakugo lunged forward to get up in Izuku's face, nose scrunched up. "Cut the bullshit, Deku. Where's that sudden super strength and super speed coming from, huh? We both know you're only good at slicing and killing, like a villain. You've got a villain quirk, but all of a sudden you show up and wow everybody with some new sort of power? You gonna explain?" Izuku's eyes narrowed as Bakugo got up in his face. "You already know about the other aspects of my body, the steel skeleton and the regenerative cells. This isn't the same SHT as those useless things. Since when did you go from a punching bag to A? Distantly, Izuku understood his childhood bully to enough of a degree that he knew part of the bullying came from Bakugo's own issues, but that had never been more apparent to him than now as something akin to his own anxiety appeared in Bakugo's eyes. "SHT, what the hell is wrong with you? Aren't you gonna answer me? Just go back to having a villain quirk and nothing else." Stop saying that to him. "Huh?" Izuku and Bakugo both gasped in shock, turning around to see the purple-haired boy that sat behind Izuku's desk walking up to them. The same boy who had completely ignored Izuku's greeting and stared straight through him as if he couldn't be bothered to lower himself to his level. That boy was now standing beside Izuku and glaring at Bakugo. "There's no such thing as a villain quirk. It's about what you do with it," he said firmly. Bakugo scrunched his nose. "Who the hell are you? Quit butting in when this isn't about you. Besides, that sounds like something someone with a villain quirk would say." The boy tapped Izuku's shoulder. "Come on, you don't have to listen to him. Let's go stand elsewhere." Izuku was stunned by the whole situation honestly. He'd forgotten about the fact that suddenly having one for all would be a shock to Bakugo that he had no solid explanation for. He couldn't make a bullshit lie about his quirk manifesting in a new way that Bakugo would believe the same way his mom had. so that already left him in a state of shock. But then having the boy who seemed to want nothing to do with him suddenly standing up to Bakugo for him really just made the whole thing confusing. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to respond, so he just nodded and followed the boy away from Bakugo, who was screeching about how this conversation wasn't over. Thanks, I don't know your name. Don't mention it. And I'm Shinsu Hitoshi. He beamed. Thanks, Shinsu. You didn't have to do that, you know. I did. Shinsu's eyes were resolute. I'll spare you the sob story for now, but let's just say I know a thing or two about being ostracized because of your quirk. Now that I've made it here to UA, that's the exact type of thing I'm trying to change. So, he nodded at Izuku. If he bothers you about that type of thing, you can count on me to be on your side. Izuku raised an eyebrow, curious about Shinsu's experiences, but he wouldn't force it out of him if he didn't want to. All right, with the quirk assessments completed, we'll head back to the classroom to review. Aizawa turned to lead the way back inside. Shinsu walked ahead without waiting for him, but he did turn to offer a small, sympathetic smile. Midoriya, come on. Uraraka suddenly nudged his side, smiling and blushing lightly before also running ahead. His eyes widened, a warmth filling his heart as he glanced between the two friends he'd made on just day one. As he ran to follow them back to class, he couldn't help but feel like he'd finally found the place he belonged here at his very own Hero Academy. Izuku wasn't sure how anyone could be more excited than him about getting into UA, but somehow his mom managed it as she dragged him in front of her mirror and presented him with the hero outfit she'd made for him. Look, I sewed it together myself. I've seen you draw your dream hero outfit so many times ever since you were little. Did I capture all the elements you wanted? He was stuck between bawling tears of joy and hesitating to say anything as he accepted the costume from her. Thanks so much, Mom. But we're supposed to be getting our first official hero outfits in 1 week, so I probably won't get to use this much. He hated making her feel like she'd wasted her time sewing this together. But naturally UA provided all of its students with custom-made costumes with the highest quality materials. Oh, I see. Right, of course my rusty sewing can't supply a real hero costume for you. She tried to hide her disappointment behind a smile. So Izuku clenched his fists and hugged her. When they ask for our designs, instead of being forced to only send drawings, I can send them this costume you made for me. I'll have the real thing be based on your sewing. So, thank you so much for making this for me. She began to sob, which in turn made him tear up, too, as they hugged each other. He tried on the costume just for her, and they discussed what adjustments he might want to see in the final product supplied by UA. He made sure to dish out tons of compliments about how she'd added so many details he wanted in his costume before finally he retired to his bed for the night, sighing and flopping down on his back, staring up at his phone. More specifically, he stared at his message history with Toga. She hadn't texted him back in days. Usually, it only took her seconds. He'd tried calling, too, but it always went straight to voicemail. I should try and find the time to visit her soon, he muttered through a yawn, setting his phone aside. He always left it unsilenced, just in case Toga finally decided to give him a call. Just in case she needed him for anything. He wasn't just playing the part now, he was a real hero, and he was her best friend. If she needed anything from him, he wanted to be there for her in a heartbeat. Aizawa's way of teaching was unlike anything Izuku had experienced before. He was incredibly direct and focused on practicality over theoretics. In other words, instead of giving lectures about the possibilities of what they would experience while working as heroes, he tried to get them to apply their quirks in hands-on training. This type of hands-on training reached a head when All Might came to their class one day, which had Izuku struggling not to jump out of his chair. He knew All Might would be taking a teaching role in UA this year largely for him, so he'd been patiently waiting for the past week for this moment. Ha. Hello, my young heroes in training. Today, we take the practicality training you've been doing and push it even further beyond. plus ultra? Meet me in front of the ground beta training area, but only after you've tried on your new official costumes. Costumes? They're here? Uraraka shouted in surprise, which made Izuku laugh and blush, even though she wasn't even talking to him. All Might laughed some more. That's right, and they've already been placed at your gym lockers. Surprise, surprise. Now go, make haste, plus. All the students rushed out of the room before he could finish, shouting in excitement to see their finalized costumes. Aizawa sighed and followed his students, leaving Izuku alone in the room with All Might for a brief moment. Are you going to be okay with holding your muscle form for the whole class? Izuku asked. All Might grinned and rustled his hair. Worried about me, are you? There's no need. All you need to worry about is doing your best in class. Today's training will be grueling, so go show me that you can apply everything I've taught you so far in a real fight. A real fight? Izuku's brain wheels turned, imagining what today's training could possibly be, but he smiled and nodded before running off to find his costume on his gym locker. Once he put it on, he took a picture of himself in the mirror to send to his mom, fanboying over himself for maybe the first time ever. His costume was exactly how he'd wanted it, a green full-body jumpsuit that allowed maximum flexibility, with knee and elbow pads. There was also a red belt that was partly designed to fit his favorite red shoes, and the outlines of the suit were black. His gloves were white and knuckleless for obvious reasons. Additionally, he had a hood that he tried on it only covered the top half of his face like he'd asked for, and there were goggles attached for when the situation called for it. One of his initial designs had added 2 pointy ears to mimic All Might's hair, but he'd ultimately removed those. Your outfit suits you. It's nothing over the top. Shinsu suddenly walked up behind him in the mirror. Why, yeah, I didn't want to go overboard with the design. He jumped back a bit and rubbed the back of his head. You look really cool, too. Simplistic and cool. Shinsu's outfit was mostly just padded and armored clothes, with a black, maybe dark purple, jacket and gloves and pants that were similarly dark in color. He pulled up a bandana around his neck to cover his mouth to bring the look together. The other students began to head out to ground beta, so Izuku walked with Shinsu, who offered him a fist bump to celebrate getting their costumes. Izuku had never fist bumped someone before since he'd never had friends beside Toga, but he was all too happy to awkwardly bump fists with his new friend. As soon as they all gathered in front of ground beta and the boys and girls saw each other's costumes, Uraraka immediately ran over to him to compliment his costume. He was a bundle of nerves as he tried to return the compliments, and then she stood next to him and Shinsu as All Might announced and explained today's heroics class lesson, the battle trials. It's essentially a bunch of mock battles between you students. You will be split up into pairs of heroes or villains. One pair of villains will be tasked with guarding a fake weapon, and the job of the hero pair is to neutralize the villains and/or the weapon. You can either immobilize the villain pair or take the weapon into your custody to claim the victory for the heroes. But if the time runs out or both heroes are taken out, then the villain pair will win. There was some murmuring about some of them needing to play the role of villains, but it was quickly snuffed out by Momo Yayurazu, the girl with a ponytail and big BRST. Look, Izuku wasn't super proud of the features he chose to help him remember her name, but he was trying to learn the names and faces of 18 new classmates, so he had to remember the features that stood out to him the most. It's only natural that heroics class would also teach us how to get in the mindset of villains. The best way to defeat the enemy is to know your enemy. In that sense, you could say those of us who get chosen to play the villain will be learning even more than the hero team, Momo reasoned. The class couldn't disagree with that, so they piped down. Izuku couldn't look away from her, though, eyes shining with admiration at how she'd quickly taken control and calmed the class down. Very good. Now then, let us randomly choose our partners and affiliations, All Might declared. Everyone was randomly assigned a partner, and Izuku couldn't believe his eyes when he was paired with none other than Momo herself. After that speech she just gave, he couldn't help but feel nervous. hoping his first impression towards her would be as good as hers was towards him. It didn't help his nerves that her hero costume was showing off lots of skin, especially around her chest area. He didn't want to rudely comment on it, but rudely staring at it was something he couldn't particularly help or control. So, it seems we've been assigned as heroes. Oh, I'm Yaoyorozu Momo, by the way. It's a pleasure to officially introduce myself to you. Oh, yeah, I'm Midoriya Izuku. Graduated from Aldera Middle School and came in first place at the entrance exams, she answered for him. He scratched the back of his head. It was flattering that a girl already knew him and even knew about his middle school. Was that weird? Because he was too busy being impressed to be weirded out. You got it all pretty much spot on. Oh, I guess I should explain my quirk to you if we'll be working together. His claws slid out of his bare knuckles, and he couldn't help but grin at the efficiency of his costume, especially around his knuckles and fists. This is my quirk. It lets me manifest claws through my knuckles via extending the natural steel bones in my body. My entire skeleton is steel, which means I can take more hits than most people, and my cells also naturally regenerate. Pretty handy since I also have enhanced physical strength that can sometimes cause some nasty backlash if I overdo it. Yeah. She nodded, taking mental notes of his quirk. I deduced most of that from watching you during the entrance exam. As for me, the easiest way for you to understand my quirk is if I just show you. Momo grabbed the parts of her shirt that were covering her chest and began to pull them apart to expose her chest even more. Eek! Wait, what are you doing? Izuku screeched, smacking his hands over his eyes and then peeking through his fingers anyways. Relax, I'm just showing you how my quirk works. Momo grunted a bit as her chest glowed and spat out a paper and a marker. You see, I can make useful objects out of the lipids in my body, like a paper and marker to draw a diagram of our battlefield to make a plan. As soon as he saw the items, he stopped hiding behind his palms and jumped forward, fists clenched in front of him enthusiastically. Wow, you really just made a paper and marker out of your body. That was like magic. How does it work? Can you make anything? How long does it take? She held out her arm and created a ball of tape. I transform the fat cells and lipids in my body into my creations. I can make pretty much any non-living object or material with the main limitation being my knowledge. The material requires my understanding of its molecular structure. He nodded along to her words, staring at the objects she created with a hand on his chin. I see, that's incredible. I've never seen a quirk that can just create unrelated objects out of your body cells like that. Oh, that must be why your hero costume is. Oh well, never mind. He still didn't want to be too rude, but she just chuckled a bit. The sound of her laughter made Izuku blush even harder. It's all right. I'm self-aware enough to know that the efficiency of my hero costume sacrifices some of my modesty. That's what we do to be heroes, though, right? We make some sacrifices. Izuku's eyes widened a bit. Not only did he learn a lot about her quirk, but he was getting a peek into her heroic ideals as well, which only made him admire her even more. All right, now that you've all hopefully gotten acquainted with your partners, the matches have been randomized, All Might announced. First up is Team Midoriya and Yaoyorozu as the heroes versus Team Bakugo and Ojiro as the villains. Sweat poured down Izuku's forehead as he and Bakugo made eye contact. He wasn't even surprised at this point that fate had chosen to pair him against Bakugo. Everyone, get to your places. You'll have a brief moment to plan before the match begins. Izuku and Momo took their place inside of the building. Izuku really wanted to freak out about actually being inside the legendary ground beta training area of UA, but right now, there were too many other things to freak out about. We were given communicators, but in case yours gets destroyed, here's a spare. Yaoyorozu created a backup communication device for them before using the paper and marker from before to draw a rough diagram of the building. The villains are probably going to have the weapon on a separate floor. We don't know exactly what to expect, But this is a mission where our only win condition is to be proactive. We should stick together and... Sticking together will never work. Izuku sighed and clenched his fists. Kaken will come straight for me. No matter what happens, me and him are going to end up having to fight. I just know it. There's no way he's going to let me avoid it. If you stick with me, you'll be caught up in the fight, too, and Kaken's quirk is perfect for fighting multiple people at once. We can't let him stall both of us. Momo pursed her lips with a finger on her chin. So you're volunteering to act as bait. It's true that Bakugo poses the greatest risk of wiping us out, and making a gamble to fight him together and risking losing to the clock is a valid concern. I see. You're much more shrewd than I gave you credit for, aren't you? Huh? All I did was give a basic assessment of the best way to handle Kaken's personality, right? She smiled. Yes, but then you also instantly decided to face him alone without hesitation. That's not just shrewdness, that's bravery. I'm glad to have you as my partner. Izuku's eyes widened. He was brave? He was being brave against Bakugo. Momo thought he was brave? His entire face was red now as he rubbed his arm. I'm glad to have you as my partner, too. Your planning phase is over. Let the match begin, All Might shouted through the comms. Izuku shook himself out of his stupor and stood up after observing Momo's diagram of the building one last time. All right, we'll stick to our plan, then. However, if I become incapacitated at any point and you end up having to face off against Kaken, try to keep your distance. I can handle a fight against him because of my many physical alterations, but you should never engage him. Hit and run. She nodded and created 2 small spheres. Hit and run, I can do that. Hey, you shitty nerd, are you there? Izuku grimaced. Of course he's shouting and giving away his position. Bakugo rounded the corner and found them almost instantly, giving Izuku his first good look at his hero costume. The most notable elements were the explosive headpieces that looked like they were mostly just there for design, and then of course the large green grenades around his arms. It didn't take a genius to discern the threat level that those possessed. Bakugo pointed straight at him with a smirk. I'm coming straight for you, and when I'm through with you, you'll be wishing you never came to Yua. Do you hear me, you weak little? Go, Momo cut him off, throwing the sphere she'd made into the floor and creating a thick cloud of black smoke. While she ran to the side to duck behind the nearest wall, Izuku rushed out of the smoke and directly at Bakugo. That's just not shrewdness, that's bravery. Momo's words echoed in his head, giving him the strength and the courage to keep being the partner that Momo saw him as, starting with distracting Bakugo so Momo could make some distance. The hell do you think you're doing? Bakugo raised one arm in the air. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Kaken always starts with a feint attack from his right. That means he didn't bother trying to dodge and instead latched onto Bakugo's left arm before he could move it, making Bakugo grumble in shock. Don't underestimate me, Kaken. He lifted Bakugo up by the left arm and threw him over his shoulder, slamming his back into the floor with a fierce battle cry, his first one ever, considering this was his very first battle. Gah! Bakugo quickly scrambled to get up as Izuku readied himself in a battle stance, fists lifted in front of him with an intense stare. Kaken, he gritted his teeth as Bakugo stared at him with wide eyes. I'm not going to be your punching bag forever. Bakugo clenched his fists. You, what the hell are you hiding? When did you randomly get the strength to do stuff without your claws, huh? He took a step forward, and Izuku took a step back. Another step forward, another step back. Bakugo paused and smirked. Heh, looks like you are still afraid of me. Well, you should be. Just because you suddenly have the strength to throw a ball farther than me doesn't mean you'll be able to beat me. He threw an explosion, which Izuku quickly dodged before ducking around the corner. This level of the building was just a bunch of long aisles and corners, so Izuku ducked into one of the aisles and kept running, rounding corner after corner to buy himself time while Bakugo shouted from behind him. You can run all you want, Deku, but that won't stop me from putting you back where you belong. The sounds of his explosions filled the whole room, like a monster stomping the floor with every step as it chased him. Izuku rounded a corner before stopping, fist clenched, waiting for Bakugo to also round it to get the jump on him. Boom! The entire aisle wall was blasted apart as Bakugo came crashing through the wall instead. Ah! Izuku stumbled backwards from the sudden explosion, and as soon as Bakugo saw him, he launched an explosion behind him to propel himself towards Izuku. There you are. You never were good at running. Taking beatings from me is what you do best. Izuku tried to dodge to the side again, but Bakugo was faster this time, grabbing his arm with a tight grip. Of course, he had never been able to lift Izuku with the steel bones in Izuku's body weighing him down, but he didn't need to. Hold still, you pathetic nerd, you should be used to this. His free hand came down on Izuku's face, barraging him with explosions while he kept his grip on his arm, making sure Izuku couldn't run or even go flying from the explosions. He was stuck in place, eating blast after blast as he shouted out in pain, even with his regenerative body working overtime to heal the burns that each explosion dealt to him. Yes, Izuku was indeed very familiar with this. Hey, Deku, didn't think you could sneak off through the school's back exit, did you? Surely you aren't coming over here hoping to sneak away. Izuku froze, not even turning around to see Bakugo's smirking face, even when a smoking hand landed on his stiff shoulder. And no, of course not. I was just Umiek. He cringed as Bakugo squeezed his shoulder even harder and added even more heat into his palm. I don't like being lied to, Deku. Especially not when it's a worm like you doing it. Worms are supposed to squirm, not lie. So go on, squirm. He kicked Izuku in the back, making him fall onto his face. What, you want to do this right here? My explosions are pretty loud, someone might hear and see. Why don't we take this somewhere else? Izuku gritted his teeth. You don't want anyone to see. Of course not. Izuku finally turned to glare at Bakugo. So that means you do realize that what you're doing is bad and it would get you in trouble. Bakugo was taken aback for a moment before he narrowed his eyes and grabbed Izuku by the scruff of his shirt, dragging him away from the school. Izuku knew he'd just doomed himself to an even worse punishment by talking back, but he didn't care. Let's get one thing clear, I'm not doing anything wrong. Those shitty teachers would freak out if they saw it, but that's because none of them get it. Only I get it, and you do, too, don't you, Deku? His smirk said that he was half taunting, half gaslighting him as he threw Izuku into his favorite dark alleyway. Your quirk makes you a special case. You were literally born to be a punching bag. I can throw explosion after explosion at your body. I could make you bleed and burn all I want, and you'll just heal it all back. All I'm doing is training my quirk with the best punching bag around. There's not a thing wrong with that. Izuku clenched his fists against the hard floor, head lowered. Slowly, his claws began to extend from his knuckles. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Bakugo grinned. I can blow you up as much as I want, because you'll just put yourself back together. I'm not really giving you any lasting damage. But those claws of yours are a whole other story, aren't they? You turn them on me, and you'll be a villain. Guess I wouldn't be surprised, though. Not like it'd change much, it'd just mean I could blow you up and get rewarded for it, finally. Tears of frustration stung Izuku's eyes. It's not like he was even bringing his claws out on purpose. He fully intended on just letting this evening play out the way it usually did, but Bakugo's words really rubbed insult into injury. The idea that Bakugo could hurt Izuku as much as he wanted because Izuku's body would never have any lasting consequences. But if Izuku ever even accidentally hurt Bakugo, it would make Izuku a villain, was just so unfair and frustrating. Accept it, Deku. Bakugo threw an explosion at him that had his body bouncing across the floor. Og, he gasped, only to be hit with another explosion that charred his face black. His skin instantly began to heal and regain color. You were born to be a punching bag. Another explosion launched him into the wall. If you want to curse something, Curse the fact that you were born with that regenerating body. Another explosion and a kick to the face had Izuku's tooth falling out. No using explosions on people. That's the rule I'm under, but you're the one exception to it. Bakugo began laughing, the thrill of actually being able to unleash his explosions at full power consuming him as he ping-ponged Izuku against the two walls of the alleyway with his explosions, the burns cutting deep into Izuku's flesh. At a certain point, Izuku couldn't even scream anymore as he was essentially tortured. In the back of his head, he knew this went so far beyond just bullying. Each powerful explosion was enough to mutilate his body, which was definitely a crime. Bakugo was committing crime after crime after crime with every explosion, and yet Izuku was the one exception because his body would just heal up as if nothing ever happened. This is what you deserve. This is what you deserve, Bakugo shouted as he barraged Izuku with close-up explosions, the heat burning Izuku's body as he shouted in pain. The constant explosions, it felt just like all those days in that alleyway. Slowly, his claws began to extend from his knuckles. I can blow you up as much as I want, because you'll just put yourself back together, but those claws of yours, you turn them on me, and you'll be a villain. Bakugo held onto Izuku's arm so he couldn't escape until Izuku's hand reached up, and he was the one grabbing Bakugo's arm instead, making Bakugo raise an eyebrow. Look at what he's done to you. Toga crouched down and wiped at Izuku's burnt face with her pink handkerchief. Izuku's lower body was still charred black and trying to recover as Toga wiped her tears. I'll get him for you, if you don't. And if you don't want me to hurt him, Toga narrowed her eyes. Then you have to promise that you'll get him back one day. Izuku's claws and eyes glistened as he clenched his fist, as if flexing his claws as he drew them backwards. With a mighty roar, with green sparks shooting up his arm and jolting back and forth from claw to claw, with a powerful swing that ignored all the explosions barraging him in the face, Izuku buried his claws into Bakugo's arm. SHT, Bakugo gasped. No, not Bakugo's actual arm. His claws punctured the green grenade attached to Bakugo's arm. Detroit, Bakugo stopped his explosions to try and tug his arm away. But it was no use as they met each other's gaze. Bakugo with wide eyes, jaw dropped wide, and Izuku with black burns all over his skin. Slash, he tore his claws out of the grenade, tearing it to pieces and revealing the tank of explosive sweat stored within. It all came bursting out, and then, the motion of being torn open was enough to ignite it. Izuku couldn't help but smirk directly at Bakugo before a huge explosion sent both boys flying back. FCK, Bakugo slammed against a wall, hitting his head against the aisle, knocking his head pieces off of him. His shoulders and chest area were all burned from his own quirk. Ugh, Izuku tumbled backwards several yards, but he dug his claws into the floor to catch himself, rising to his feet as his burns began to heal. One of his eyes was blurry. Bakugo's explosions must have messed it up, but that was beginning to heal, too. DMNU, 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 you shitty nerd, Bakugo shouted as he shakily stood and observed the broken grenade on his right arm. What? You know you can't beat me with your shitty villain quirk, so you have to use mine against me? You're pathetic, and you'll always be pathetic. Izuku's head was still ringing, but he managed to spit out some BLD to the side before standing up straight and glaring at Bakugo. Bakugo waited for his retort, but instead, Izuku didn't say anything and just rushed straight at him. You dumbass, I know you won't actually attack me with your claws, unless you want to show everybody what a villain you are. Despite his cockiness, Bakugo did back up and launch explosions to try and keep Izuku back. Instead of dodging, Izuku gladly took the explosions. An entire lifetime of getting blasted had him well prepared for a scenario like this. The power of One for All filled his legs with green sparks, letting him push forward despite the explosions. My claws are the claws of a hero, Izuku shouted, stabbing forward with his claws. So you can FCK off. Bakugo's whole body and face stiffened in shock when he saw those claws coming straight at him as Izuku pushed past his explosions. With a shout of rage, Izuku drove his clawed fist directly into Bakugo's stomach. "Gah!" Bakugo gasped, coughing up saliva and throat fluids. "Young Midoriya," All Might's voice suddenly sounded in their communicators, but his panic subsided when he noticed the lack of BLD coming out of Bakugo. Bakugo's body went flying from the hit to his stomach, green sparks dancing up Izuku's arm, but no claws. He had merely used them for the psychological warfare against Bakugo, retracting them right before the hit so he obviously wouldn't stab him. As Bakugo groaned from the punch and struggled to stand, All Might cleared his throat and spoke into both of their communicators again. "Young Bakugo, if you unleash a barrage of explosions like that right in his face again—" "It's fine," Izuku cut in, getting in another fighting stance, claws coming back out. "This is a battle, after all, and my body is an exception. I can take hits like those." He narrowed his eyes. "I want to fight Kakin at his full power." "Young man," All Might muttered, as if he knew he should ignore Izuku's pride and warn Bakugo not to go overboard. But his personal feelings for his student made him want to honor Izuku's feelings and wishes. "Carry on with the match, then." "Yes, sir," Izuku nodded, his eyes more determined than ever. Bakugo clutched his stomach as he stood up again, glaring at Izuku. What the hell did you just say to him, you BSTRD?" His voice was breathless and dripping with venom. "You just told him that you want me at my full power? You're seriously cocky enough to where you think you can make requests like that? Don't FCK look down on me like that, you piece of SHT." Izuku tensed up, keeping his distance as Bakugo reached for his remaining arm grenade. He'd destroyed the first one before Bakugo had gotten a chance to use it, instinctively knowing the danger they posed, but it seemed now he would see exactly what they were capable of. "These grenade launchers don't just store my sweat, they concentrate it through the cannon at the top, meaning I can turn my wide-ranged explosions into condensed blasts of firepower." He fiddled with the trigger on the grenade's cannon launcher. "Hey, Deku, you know better than anyone what it's like to be a punching bag for my explosions. Can you imagine what it's like when they've been stored up in here and then concentrated into a single blast? What was it you said? Something about wanting me at my full power." Izuku's eyes widened as Bakugo's fingers slid against the trigger. As soon as Momo darted out of the smoke, she headed straight for the stairs. The sounds of Bakugo's explosions got more and more distant, meaning Izuku was making a run for it in order to put more distance between her and Bakugo, letting her safely backtrack where Bakugo had appeared from. Thanks to his loud entrance, it let her know which direction he'd come from. All she had to do was go that way and up the stairs he'd probably come from, and she'd find his partner with the weapon. Speaking of weapons, she briefly paused to create a bow staff for herself, gripping it tightly and using it to steady herself when an explosion shook her even though it was happening in the floor below. "Midoriya," she murmured, glancing down at the floor with furrowed brows. She couldn't imagine anyone going up against the explosive monster that was Bakugo, but she just had to believe in him as she pressed onwards. Finally, she stumbled across the room where Ojiru stood in front of what looked like a large toy rocket. She gasped and hid around the corner, taking deep breaths as her chest began glowing. All she needed was a net gun or something to trap him with. The wall behind her suddenly broke, and a muscular tail slammed into her back, sending her flying to the side with a gasp. "Ah!" She used the bow staff to steady herself and quickly turned around to block another hit from that tail with her metal staff. "Impressive reflexes. I didn't realize you would be so adept at close combat," Ojiru commented as he backflipped backwards and got in a fighting stance. She gritted her teeth, clutching her staff tightly. As soon as her arm began to glow, he charged in again. "I don't think so. Anyone who's been watching you since we got into UA would know that the one way to beat you is to not give you any time to think." TCH, she blocked another few swipes of his tail, but naturally, with a quirk like hers, She'd of course kept creating things while she'd been looking for Ojiru. Another smoke bomb just like earlier bought her some time. You can't run from huh? Ojiru swept his tail through the air to clear the smoke, only for Momo to be nowhere in sight. His eyes widened. Momo was 3 feet away from the weapon, sneaking past Ojiru and into the weapon room, but before she could touch it, he came sprinting after her and forced her to dodge a tail attack. I see, so you're the type that doesn't mind abandoning a fight. Fighting you isn't my goal, confiscating that weapon is. A hero never loses sight of what the end goal is. Ojiru got into another fighting stance, and Momo prepared to defend while her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way to distract him and just get the weapon. Young Bakugo, don't even think about it. All Might's voice sounded in their communicators, and Bakugo responded. He's the one who said he wanted me to go all out. Besides, it's not like he'll die permanently. Momo covered her mouth, and even Ojiru was stunned into pausing their fight. He's just acting the part of the villain, right? Ojiru asked her for reassurance as she met his gaze. I don't. The entire building trembled as if it was collapsing, drowning out the sound of All Might's shout. Ojiru caught himself with his tail while Momo stumbled into the wall before steadying herself with her staff, eyes wide. The tremors persisted for a good 10 seconds before everything went eerily still. Slowly, Momo pulled out the backup communicator she'd made. Midoriya, she swallowed thickly, voice growing more desperate. Midoriya, are you there? Can you answer me? If you can't speak, just make some noise so I know you're okay. Silence. Then, more explosions. The explosions got closer and closer. Midoriya. Momo gripped her own forehead, breaths growing unsteady. It wasn't like her to fall apart, especially in a training simulation like this, but all of a sudden, it felt like she was in a building with an actual villain, and she didn't know the status of her teammate. The explosions got closer and closer, and Ojiru seemed to be snapping out of his hesitation to focus on his goal, just like she'd lectured him about. Izuku's smiling face popped up in her head, along with his last words to her. If I become incapacitated at any point and you end up having to face off against Kaken, try to keep your distance. I can handle a fight against him because of my many physical alterations, but you should never engage him. Hit and run. She didn't know what had happened to Izuku, but the match was still going, and it was up to her. At the very least, she would do as Izuku said and try to win for his sake. Don't just stand there, you worthless ape, Bakugo suddenly burst through the wall. Oh, right, Ojiru ran at her, but she'd already tossed another smoke bomb before fleeing the room. Explosions immediately sounded from behind her as Bakugo shouted with a grin. Quit running and just die already. Her heart P&D. Die? Under normal circumstances, she'd just accept it as his form of fighting talk. But Izuku's sudden disappearance made her weary. There was no time to respond to him as she reached the stairs and quickly dumped a bunch of explosives out of her back. You're mine now, Beach. Bakugo caught up and lifted his hands. She tossed a flashbang grenade, but he was used to explosions given his quirk. He blocked his eyes with one hand and launched an explosion with the other. It didn't hit her head-on, but his explosion hit the grenades that she had placed on the stairs, causing them to explode preemptively without her command. Gah! She cried out as her own devices blasted her down the stairs. However, thanks to how she'd placed them, they also fulfilled their intended purpose of making the entire stairway collapse in on itself while Bakugo was still at the top, buying her some time. Her eyes widened as she glanced down at the burn marks all over her skin, but there was no time to panic or make burn lotion or even to cry in pain as she forced herself back to her feet with her bow staff and began running. Once I get through this rubble, it's FCK over for you, Bakugo shouted so loud she could hear him from the other side of the collapsed stairway, even as she put distance between them. If he was going to try and blast through the rubble and chase her from that direction, then it gave her the opportunity to set up traps to cover that side. She left laser traps behind her. She set up clumsy cameras connected to cannons, with a device in her hand to let her watch for when he got close to them so she could make them shoot. She threw metal spikes on the floor despite how stupid it was since he could launch himself over them. Even she realized that she was getting desperate. 5 minutes were left on the clock. She couldn't just run away the entire time. Beating Bakugo in a head-on fight didn't seem realistic, so her only chance was to get back to the bomb room. She didn't even have time to think about what she would do once she got there and faced off against Ojiru again. One thing at a time. Momo, she steeled herself and began circling around to the stairs on the other end of the room. But she froze and gasped when she saw an arm laying on the floor. No body, just an arm. Her hands covered her mouth as she fought the urge to vomit, pupils trembling in horror. He's fine, she told herself. You watched his body shatter against the ground during the entrance exam. You watched his body lose its form and turn into a puddle of human liquid, and he came back from that. No matter how much her logic tried to calm her down, her emotions still came crashing down on her as she collapsed against one of the aisle walls, knees shaking as she took deep breaths. Bakugo had done this to her partner, to Izuku, and he was coming for her next. But she couldn't even focus on that. All she could focus on was that arm. I'm glad to have you as my partner, too. She gripped her staff harder as she steadied herself. She had to seize victory from the jaws of these impossible odds for his sake. The time for trembling like a scared little girl would have to wait. No matter how shocked she was, if she failed, everything Izuku did for her, Izuku's temporary death, would end up being for nothing. That was not the type of hero Momo Yaoyorozu was. With focused eyes, she ran past the arm and straight for the stairs. Where is he? She stared down at the device in her hands attached to her cameras, ready to fire her cannons when Bakugo came into view, but he never showed up. As she ran up the flight of stairs and into the next hallway, she paused with wide eyes. Don't tell me. You're dead meat now. Ponytail Beach. Bakugo rounded the corner and immediately launched himself at her. He predicted my movements, knew I'd think he would pursue me, and instead chose to wait and block my exit. She quickly created a large metal shield and hid behind it as the sound of an explosion went off. But instead of attacking, Bakugo used the explosion to launch himself up and over her, with another explosion to maneuver himself behind her for a clean hit. Gah! She gasped as she was blasted into her own shield from behind, sending her skidding across the floor. Despite his abrasive attitude, he's shockingly more clever and calculated than I thought. It's the end of the line. If you want to throw a fit over losing, blame the fact that you got paired with the biggest loser in the whole world. Deku really made for the most useless partner ever, huh? I almost feel bad for you, Bakugo boasted as he walked towards her. He was certainly playing into the role of the monologuing villain perfectly fine just being himself. Momo gritted her teeth and struggled to rise to her knees, observing the burn marks on her skin with heavy breaths. When she tried to look up at the approaching villain, her vision went blurry and her ears were ringing. This was it. She knew her own limits and she knew when she'd lost. She squeezed both eyes shut and lowered her head. Maybe they were right after all. Mother, Father, I passed the entrance exam. These are the results. We know, Momo. We watched the entire thing. Momo grimaced and clutched her hand close to her chest. So then, I can attend Yua like we agreed, right? Her mother and father glanced at each other. Momo, we've given you everything you could ever want. We've provided you with a clear path to a successful future, and we've ensured an easy life for you, our perfect daughter. All you need to do is follow in our footsteps. So, tell us again, are you absolutely sure you would rather throw it all away to instead pursue becoming a hero? A hero who must put your life in danger. There was no hesitation as Momo nodded, insisting on her own future for what must have been the 100th time as her parents sighed. All right, but we'll be watching your progress. We have no doubt that you'll get good grades no matter where you are. But if this path proves to only be a detriment to you, then your father and I may need to intervene. Please understand, sweetie pie, we don't do this because we want to control you. We just want to make sure you have the best future possible. Momo squeezed her eyes shut, tears welling up in her eyes, her life practically flashing before her eyes as the sound of Bakugo's stomps grew nearer. Maybe she wasn't good enough for this, after all. But even so, she had to go down SWNGNG. As Bakugo lifted his hand to deliver the final explosion, Momo's hand glowed and created one last stun grenade. There was no time to think about the power level. As soon as she had it, she yanked the lid off and caused a massive flashbang that blinded both her and Bakugo. SHT, Bakugo scowled, stumbling backwards and SWNGNG his arms forward as his eyes were forced shut. At that same moment, a loud battle cry sounded from the other end of the hall. Momo blinked the tears out of her eyes, the stun grenade still blinding her, but through her blurry vision, she made out a green figure charging down the hallway. Leave her alone. A loud clang sound echoed through the hallway as Izuku rammed his head straight into Bakugo's head, knocking him back. Bakugo's eyes flew wide open, letting him get one last look at Izuku before he collapsed backwards, instantly knocked out. Momo rubbed her eyes furiously, struggling to stand. Midoriya, is that you? I thought, whoa, she stumbled as she attempted to stand, tripping straight into the solid chest of what she assumed was her teammate. She smiled as he caught her, her eyes slowly readjusting and recovering from the flashbang as she looked up at him. I'm so glad you're Oka. There was only one green eye looking at her. Where the other eye should have been, there was just nothing. That entire side of his face seemed disfigured in general. She was leaning against the right side of his chest because there was no left side to lean against. The entire area from his left pec and shoulder had been blown off of him, showing off parts of his steel ribcage. For the first time, she and the rest of the class who were watching actually got to see the proof that Izuku's bones were literally made of steel. His other arm was still there, sort of hanging off of his shoulder, completely useless with fingers missing. Miraculously, both of his legs still seemed to be working. Midoriya you, she struggled to speak without vomiting in horror and shock, but instead of pushing away from him, she reached up and cupped his burnt cheek. I can make some emergency ointment. It'll be okay, just let me. I'm fine, he insisted, though he subtly leaned into her touch. I'll heal on my own. We still have a weapon to subdue, right? Her eyebrows furrowed, but she didn't want to reject his determination, so she steeled herself. Together, they made their way to the weapon room, and together, they faced down Ojiru. Just the sight of Izuku's state alone was enough to distract Ojiru, not just the physical horror of it. But naturally he was also incredibly concerned about his classmate looking so disfigured and injured. In the end, Ojiru was his own downfall as he kicked one of Izuku's steel bones, breaking his own ankle, and that was the match. Despite accomplishing their goal, Momo could hardly even care about that as she knelt next to Izuku, who collapsed against the wall. Midoriya, I can make some emergency first aid. Just tell me where it hurts most, all right? I know you'll heal, but it must still be painful, she fretted over him. He offered her one small half-smile before his eyes fell shut. All Might came rushing onto the scene a minute later. When Izuku woke up, his whole body was still aching, as if the explosions had sunk into his steel bones and left them vibrating from the shock of every hit. You're in the hospital. He looked to the side, where Momo sat at his hospital bedside. Oh, that makes sense. Did we win? Or was that all a dream? She shook her head. We won thanks to you. At any other time, he probably could have teared up hearing that he'd beaten Bakugo, but he was still sort of out of it as he sat up and observed his own body. I look fully healed. I guess that's what happens when you combine my healing cells with Recovery Girl, huh? Midoriya. Momo's voice was suddenly more stern as she sighed. What happened to you back there? I'm sorry for letting things reach that point. Maybe if I'd come up with a better plan, or had a better way for us to deal with Bakugo besides using you as bait, we could have avoided it." "Huh? What are you saying?" He waved his hands around, nervousness growing as Momo got more emotional. "Hey, you didn't do anything wrong. We won, right? So you were totally fine. In fact, we only won thanks to you buying so much time and surviving on your own so well. So really, I owe you. Besides, I'm used to getting my body hurt a lot. That's what my regenerative cells are for, right? So it's really no problem." She just shook her head and even reached forward to rest a hand on top of his, making him blush and stiffen. "Even if you can heal, you still feel the pain of getting blown up like that." What Bakugo did was completely unacceptable, and All Might dismissed him from class for the day so that Aizawa could decide on what sort of punishment to give him for what he did. His fate is in Aizawa's hands now. Izuku's eyes widened. What Bakugo did was unacceptable. Obviously, in the back of his mind, he knew that it was true. Bakugo tortured him and hurt him like he was an inhuman object because he could heal back his injuries. That level of dehumanization was bound to catch up with him someday. Still, it was a shock for Izuku to actually hear someone say those words to him. What Bakugo did was completely unacceptable. "Thank you," he murmured. Momo's eyes widened. "What? I'm in the middle of apologizing for allowing you to get so hurt. What are you thanking me for right now?" He wiped at some of his tears before smiling at her. "Just thank you. I don't really know how to explain it, but I guess I'm just glad I had you as my partner." Her eyes remained wide open as she stared at him, swallowing thickly and clutching a hand close to her chest. He stared back at her, until she glanced down to where her hand was still on top of his. Instead of moving it away, she just squeezed his hand a bit more. "Me too. I'm glad I had you as my partner, too. I wish I'd gotten to tell that to Bakugo when he was saying mean things about you." They sat in awkward silence for a while before Izuku groaned and stretched some more. "Aw man, did I miss the rest of the matches? I was really looking forward to seeing how the rest of our classmates fight and work together. I had a whole section ready for it in my notebook." She giggled, which made him blush and stare. "No, the class is still going, though Jiru texted me a few minutes ago and they seem to already be on the last match. It's Ida and Isui as the hero team versus Uraraka and Shinsu as the villains." "Uraraka and Shinsu?" Izuku immediately jumped out of bed. I'd SCK that I missed the rest of the matches, but I definitely can't miss their match. Ah, they're the only friends I have here. What sort of friend would I be if I missed their fight?" He turned to run back to class when Momo cleared her throat. "Your only friends, huh?" He paused and turned back to her, where she was smiling somewhat teasingly. A smile of his own slowly formed on his face as she walked towards him. "My only friends besides you." She nodded in approval, and without another word, walked past him to lead him back to class. By the time they rejoined the rest of the class, Ida and Tsuyu had already cornered Uraraka and Shinsu in the room with the weapon. "It's over for you villains. Hand yourselves over at once," Ida shouted, pushing up his glasses over dramatically. Shinsu gritted his teeth. "Don't call me a villain." Ida pointed at him. "But that's what you are, is it not? A villain who is here to commit atrocity." His eyes suddenly went blank. "I tried to warn you." Shinsu adjusted his mask, eyes narrowed. "Tie yourself up and your partner." "Ribbit?" Tsuyu began to back away, but Ida was faster. Within seconds, Ida and Tsuyu were both tied to each other on the floor, while Uraraka jumped up and down and high-fived him. Izuku's eyes softened as he stared at Shinsu's neutral face. "I'll spare you the sob story for now, but let's just say, I know a thing or two about being ostracized because of your quirk." Those had been Shinsu's words to him when they first spoke. "Brainwashing, huh?" he muttered. As Shinsu and Uraraka rejoined the rest of the class, Izuku and Momo immediately ran up to them, and Izuku's eyes were sparkling again. You both were amazing, especially you. Shinsu, you were the MVP. Your quirk is amazing. It can be used in so many ways, like complete crowd control. You can peacefully resolve villain encounters so easily, not to mention hostage negotiations. It would be so fun to do hypothetical villain scenarios with you. Shinsu raised an eyebrow. I never really thought about it like that. In the end, it's just my way of forcing my control onto someone else. Izuku shook his head. It's way more than that. The ability to win fights and end conflicts without the need for violence. That's a super amazing power. He rubbed the back of his head, at a loss for words as Izuku complimented him. Momo and Uraraka glanced at each other and laughed lightly before Uraraka stepped forward. How are you, by the way? Looks like you've healed up completely, which is crazy to think about, even though I've seen you come back from way worse. Why, yeah, I'm good as new, he insisted. Her eyebrows furrowed. Are you sure? I know your body can heal, but getting hurt that badly is sure to leave some sort of lasting damage, right? What was that Bakugo guy thinking? She got close enough that their faces were mere inches apart, making Izuku blush and back away. I'm fine. Aw, really? Haha. She opened her mouth like she wanted to protest more, but she was interrupted by a cheery laugh. Ha ha ha. Excuse me, but it's time to return to the classroom and break down the fights we had today. So get a move on, everyone, All Might announced, walking over to them before clearing his throat. Except for you, young Midoriya. I need to have a word with you. Izuku froze and gulped, staying behind as the rest of the class returned to the classroom. Uraraka, Shinsu, and Momo cast him one final glance before he was alone with his mentor. He followed All Might around the nearest corner, where All Might immediately began coughing and reverted back to his smaller form. Young man, you know what I'm here to scold you about, don't you? He stared at the floor and nodded. Yeah, I was too reckless, right? All Might sighed. Reckless doesn't even begin to describe it, and yet it was only the result of my own recklessness. All Might also stared down at the floor. I'm sorry. I should have put my foot down and stepped in, but I allowed the match to persist because you are my successor. For your sake, I felt like I needed to let the match go on if that was what you wanted. I wanted to let you spread your wings in your first fight, even though I knew the amount of pain you were going through. Getting your body blown to bits like that. I'm sorry. The truth is that I was the selfish and reckless one. It was my responsibility to stop young Bakugo, even if you wouldn't have wanted that. Izuku's eyes widened. No words came out of him as his mentor, his idol, and his hero gave him a heartfelt apology. This was not the scolding he'd been expecting. It's okay. All Might, like you said, the match played out the way I wanted it to. If you had interrupted and didn't allow me to reach a conclusion to the match on my own, then, win or lose, I think I would have been devastated. So thank you for trusting me. All Might stared at him briefly before sighing again and shaking his head. You don't understand, not that I expect you to. The responsibility for your training and your safety falls onto my shoulders. Even if you think I did the right thing, I know from an adult standpoint that I absolutely did not. He rested a hand on Izuku's shoulder. From here on out, I will do everything in my power so that you don't end up in a situation like that again. Making that promise is the least I can do to begin making it up to you for my failure today. Izuku still didn't quite agree, but for All Might's sake, he just nodded and let All Might begin leading him back to class. Oh, All Might about Kaken. He stopped walking, lips pursed together. What exactly is going to happen to him now? HM? Oh, you've known him since you were both young, correct? I suppose it's only natural that you want to know. I can't say for sure Aizawa is currently deciding the severity of his punishment, but what I can say is that whatever happens to that boy next shouldn't be any of your concern. You were the victim in this scenario, after all. Let us adults handle it, all right? All Might continued to walk ahead, assuming Izuku was following, but Izuku stayed put for a moment or two, fists clenched at his sides, staring up into the sky. It was the first time the sheer violence of his dynamic with Bakugo had ever been witnessed publicly, and the first time Bakugo was ever facing consequences for it. They'd known each other for their entire lives, and Izuku had accepted Bakugo's torment as a natural occurrence in his life for so long. But suddenly, it felt like things were starting to change for them, and he didn't quite know how to feel about it. It was relieving yet stressful. It had been a long time coming, and yet it still felt unreal that Bakugo was actually facing consequences. What would their dynamic be like after this? He shook his head and quickly followed after All Might. Whatever came next, one thing was clear. Today's fight had forever changed things between Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo, and things between the two estranged childhood friends would probably never be the same again. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through What If Deku Had Wolverine's Powers. I hope you found it as intriguing and thought-provoking as we did. A big shout out to Dekuism King for crafting such a compelling story. Don't forget to check out their profile on Archive of Our Own for more amazing works. The link is in the description below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to What If Deku 2 for more fascinating explorations into the world of fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we're always excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you guys in the next video.